Chapter 138. I'm sorry, our defense wasn't good enough and caused you to be frightened. Finance Minister Yves said to Han with a worried expression. Waving his hand, Han's expression was solemn as he said seriously, Yves, don't apologize, I won't pursue the matter. Don't investigate this matter either, I'll handle it myself. Yves first breathed a sigh of relief when Han said this, and then asked in astonishment, why? Honorable father, since Grandpa Han has said so, you don't need to worry so much. Lawrence's face was a bit gloomy as he spoke to Yves. Lawrence, you don't need to worry either. I know who did this. Han flicked a glance at Lawrence and seemed to know something as he spoke. Lawrence nodded indifferently and looked at Han Shaw and Phoebe. He hesitated and asked Phoebe, did Cameron force you to join their merchant alliance? But I've already refused him. Phoebe responded. Very good, you must not compromise, otherwise your boot merchant guild will face an enormous crisis. Lawrence mused for a bit and advised Phoebe. Han Shaw listened to all of their conversations and observed them for a while. He seemed to grasp something from Lawrence and Han's conversation, but because the two of them hadn't talked about anything substantial, Han Shaw didn't ask too many questions. Han Shaw wasn't that curious about other people's affairs. Seeing that it was difficult to continue the banquet because of this assassination, Han Shaw lazily stretched and said to Phoebe, I think the banquet is over, can we leave now? Rolling her eyes at Han Shaw, Phoebe bowed slightly to Yves and old Han, saying with a smile, we still have some matters to attend to, so we'll be taking our leave first. Yves couldn't keep them any longer since this situation had occurred. He sighed lowly and said apologetically, all right then, be careful on your way back. Brian, remember what we said. I'll look for you tomorrow. Don't go missing for a few days again. Seeing that Phoebe and Han Shaw were about to leave, Lawrence suddenly reminded Han Shaw not to forget their earlier agreement. Han Shaw nodded in understanding. Just as he was about to leave, Han spoke again, so your name is Brian. I'll remember you. Smiling without replying, Han Shaw and Phoebe left the banquet together with some merchants who had left in a hurry. They boarded their respective carriages and returned to their original route. Who is it that wants to kill old Han? Even I know that old Mr. Han has made outstanding contributions to the Empire. Many of the current officers in the Empire's army were once old Mr. Han's subordinates. With his position, there shouldn't be many in the entire Empire who would dare touch him. After entering the carriage, Phoebe frowned slightly and spoke faintly. Just in case, the three original demons had been placed nearby and were constantly paying attention to any changes in the surroundings. After Phoebe had finished speaking, Han Shaw thought for a bit and said, we helped old Han today, and may have attracted trouble as well. However, for your company, there are definitely more advantages than disadvantages if you can maintain a good relationship with old Han. But this matter doesn't have much to do with me. Besides, I'm not afraid of anything since I'm all alone, but you have to be careful. Flashing her teeth in a smile, Phoebe said, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Then I won't say more. You should be able to clearly explain what you promised me, right? Han Shaw first nodded and then straightened his body slightly, staring at Phoebe as he asked. All right, look at you like that. That batch of treasure that I don't know where you got it from, but I've specifically had someone estimate it. It's worth more than 40,000 gold coins and is completely enough to offset all the random materials you've purchased. In addition, I've also prepared a large amount of food for you. However, it will take some time for you to get a space ring with a larger capacity, so there's no stock on the market for the moment. The attack at the banquet hadn't affected Phoebe's mood at all, and she spoke with a cheerful expression at this moment. Han Shaw finally breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Phoebe's words. He displayed an extremely gratified expression and said with a laugh, I'm at ease with you handling things. Forget about the space ring, I've just obtained one with a larger capacity. You can take what you need when we arrive at the company. I've already taken the risk to gather all the materials for you when I didn't know if you had enough gold coins. Don't worry, there won't be any problems. Phoebe raised her head proudly and exclaimed softly. Han Shaw was a bit moved when he heard Phoebe's words. He understood that Phoebe had taken the risk to do so purely because of their friendship. Phoebe had even thought of paying for it herself. From this, it could be seen that Phoebe was indeed a friend worth making. Just as Hanshaw was feeling grateful, Phoebe reached out and pinched Hanshaw's leg, then glared at Hanshaw and said, "You dared to lie to me that you didn't know how to dance. Who knows how skilled you've become in the end? You're the worst." In all honesty, before this banquet, Hanshaw truly didn't know how to dance. He had completely muddled through learning on the spot. However, due to the development of his brain, Hanshaw's learning speed was too abnormal. This caused Phoebe to think that Hanshaw was faking it. "I'm innocent, I really didn't know how to dance before, it's all thanks to your good teaching," Hanshaw complained as he flattered Phoebe. Do you like dancing with me?" All of a sudden, Phoebe lowered her head and asked softly, looking a bit shy. Nodding, Hanshaw casually replied, it feels pretty good." "Then, I want you to promise me that you'll dance with me again next time. Otherwise, I won't help you in the future." Phoebe's face lit up as she said cheerfully, Okay, I promise. As long as you help me seriously, I'll promise you anything you want. Even murder and arson aren't a problem, not to mention dancing." There were many things that he would need to trouble Phoebe with in the future, so Hanshaw agreed without hesitation. The two of them didn't run into any trouble along the way as they chatted happily. When they returned to the Boot Merchant Guild, Phoebe took out the materials that Hanshaw needed, including several warehouses full of rations and daily necessities. She was about to fill up Hanshaw's current space ring. "Help me keep the rest of the gold coins first. These are the other materials that I need you to purchase. Continue to help me collect them." The Wood Elite Zombie and Yin Demon both needed to be refined, so Hanshaw had long since made another list. He handed it to Phoebe after taking care of the matters that needed to be taken care of. Skimming through the list that Hanshaw handed over, Phoebe looked at Hanshaw in surprise, saying, "Food for 100 people and all sorts of strange materials. Just what are you planning to do?" "Heh, nothing much. Just take care of it for me. I'll give you the gold coins next time I come over." Hanshaw didn't explain too much and left the Boot Merchant Guild after saying this, returning to the academy by himself. When Hanshaw returned to the Necromancy Major, the sky had already darkened. The cold wind in the winter night whizzed past, and the bone-chilling cold made it so that no one was willing to walk outside. However, a figure stood not far from the entrance to the dorms, shivering from the cold. Her small face was red as she continuously walked around a stone statue not far away. "What are you doing here?" Hanshaw couldn't help but ask when he saw that this figure was Lisa. "I'm waiting for you." Lisa's eyes shone with joy when she saw Hanshaw appear. She quickly walked towards Hanshaw and spoke urgently. His brow furrowed, Hanshaw took off the coat he was wearing and wrapped it around Lisa. He asked puzzledly, "It's such a cold night. Why are you waiting for me here alone?" Hanshaw's actions made Lisa's small face light up with joy. She then said with a frown, "My mother is sick and I need to make a trip home. I may not be back for a long time. I want to say goodbye to you. It's just a goodbye, you can come find me tomorrow. Why do you have to wait for me tonight?" Hanshaw saw that Lisa was still shivering and hesitated for a moment before activating the mystical glacial spellfire. He slowly waved his right hand and waves of warmth surged forth, warming Lisa's shivering body. "You often disappear mysteriously because I'm leaving early in the morning. I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to see you, so I waited for you here. I didn't know if you would come, but you finally came back." Lisa's body warmed up and she breathed out comfortably, speaking softly to Hanshaw. "Hey, actually you don't need to say goodbye to me." Hanshaw felt that the atmosphere was a bit off and held back for a while before speaking. Lisa was silent for a moment and stared at Hanshaw with a burning gaze. She suddenly said, "Brian, you said that you like me. Now that you're no longer an errand boy or slave, come home with me. We can be together." Hanshaw was shocked when he heard this and stood there dumbly. He looked at Lisa's serious expression and didn't know what to say for a moment. Chapter 139. "Hey, I have a butt full of things to do right now. I'm afraid I don't have the time to go back with you." Hanshaw mused for a moment and said to Lisa, Han Shuro had initially detested Lisa, but as they interacted more and more, Han Shuro realized that Lisa wasn't that malicious of a person, but was just a bit too pure. Especially later on, Lisa had protected him at every turn. This made it difficult for Han Shuro to be like before and harbor thoughts of revenge against Lisa. However, although he no longer detested Lisa, Han Shuro didn't have any romantic feelings for her. Therefore, Han Shuro could only casually dodge Lisa's suggestion. Lisa was silent for a short while after Han Shuro's words and then nodded. "All right then, I'll go home tomorrow. I hope that you'll be even stronger the next time I see you." Lisa obviously didn't take these words to heart as she smiled at Han Shuro after she'd finished speaking and then walked back to the female dorms alone, her figure trembling slightly from behind. Shaking his head and sighing, Han Shuro only walked back to his own dorm room when he saw Lisa disappear. Han Shuro had just pushed the door open when a long sword was already stabbing towards his chest. His expression abruptly changed as Han Shuro retreated outside without a second thought. It was a pity that the long sword was like lightning and had already reached Han Shuro's chest in a flash. Han Shuro, who'd taken a step back, suddenly fell to the side. The long sword pierced through Han Shuro's ribs and pierced deep into Han Shuro's body, instantly injuring him. The remaining force of the attack was quickly withdrawn by the ambusher. Han Shuro didn't make a sound as the piercing pain assaulted his body. The Demon Slayer edge suddenly shot out from his right sleeve and pierced through the door, directly stabbing towards the ambusher behind the door. Dark green fighting aura suddenly shot out and the door was instantly shattered into pieces. A masked person suddenly appeared in front of Han Shuro with the sound of metal colliding. With Han Shuro's current eyesight, this level of concealment would have no effect on someone he'd met once. Han Shuro hadn't thought that Clark would be so frightening and persistent. He'd retreated in a panic last night and hadn't thought that he'd be hiding in the dorms tonight to make a move against him. Because he felt a bit apologetic towards Lisa, Han Shuro hadn't paid much attention to it in the middle of the night in the dormitory. Therefore, he'd relaxed his guard. He hadn't thought that Clark would actually launch a sneak attack. This was why he'd been injured by the sneak attack from the start. As an Earthrider, Clark's fighting aura should also be milky white. It looked like after experiencing last night's failure, Clark had finally understood that Han Shuro wouldn't be easy to deal with and was much more cautious in his actions this time. These thoughts flashed through Han Shuro's mind like lightning. Before the concealed Clark's next stab, Han Shuro looked at Clark and abruptly exerted force in his feet, retreating explosively outwards as he yelled, "Assassin!" With a bang, Han Shuro's back suddenly pressed against a solid ice barrier. When he turned around, he discovered that there was only air behind him. His heart immediately changed as he knew that Clark had been prepared this time. Han Shuro had focused all of his mental strength after Clark had appeared and could sense that there wasn't a third person in the surroundings. As an Earthrider, Clark must have used expensive magic scrolls that didn't require magical guidance in order to be able to set up such a solid ice barrier in the surroundings. Only then would he be able to set up a solid ice barrier in the surroundings and block all of Han Shuro's escape routes, including the transmission of sound. Indeed, a back collision didn't break through the ice barrier. Han Shuro could clearly see a look of ridicule flash through Clark's eyes, which were only showing his eyes. A ball of dark green fighting aura then blossomed once again, presenting the appearance of churning waves as it surged towards Han Shuro. His thoughts moved and the Demon Slayer edge that had just returned to his hand suddenly whistled sharply under the infusion of magical yuan. It danced with an exceedingly scorching wave of fire to defend against Clark's fighting aura attack. It was a pity that halfway through this wave of fighting aura, Clark's eyes flashed as he sensed the strange energy that had suddenly appeared after Han Shuro's magical yuan had activated the Demon Slayer edge. Han Shuro then discovered that the wave of fighting aura that was churning towards him was dark green in color at the front, and then became a milky white towards the back. Without even thinking, Han Shuro knew that Clark had finally revealed his hidden strength because he had sensed an unknown energy and was afraid of making a mistake. He had completely displayed the strength that an Earthrider should have. Although magical yuan had boundless power, Han Shuro had only trained for a few months after all. Han Shuro was certain that it would be difficult for him to defend against this wave of attacks. His mind raced with extreme speed as the three original demons circling around Clark instantly dove into Clark's body under Han Shoror's orders, gnawing away at the essence blood in Clark's body without a care for anything else. Ah! Clark, who hadn't made a sound, immediately howled in pain under the gnawing of the original demons. The milky white fighting aura that had just blossomed was mostly absorbed back into Clark's body, attempting to destroy the three original demons that were causing trouble. An enormous bang rang out as Han Shoror and Clark's attack, which had been condensed from fighting aura and magical yuan, finally collided. Han Shoror stumbled as his head felt a bit dizzy. Suddenly, 3 waves of piercing pain were reflected in Han Shoror's nerves. Han Shoror's somewhat muddled mind immediately cleared up as he understood that the 3 original demons had most likely been destroyed in Clark's body. Focusing his attention on Clark, Han Shoror discovered that Clark's eyes were staring at his body with fear, a trickle of fresh blood slowly flowing from the corner of his mouth. Due to the 3 original demons gnawing away at the essence blood, Clark's body must have been injured. Otherwise, he wouldn't be looking at his body with such a fearful gaze. After all, for the people of this world, having an unknown entity enter the body and gnaw away at the essence blood was absolutely an unforgettable experience. The Demon Slayer edge was infused with magical yuan anew and carried a scorching hot aura as it pierced into the solid ice boundary behind Han Shoror's back. A crisp bang sounded out as Han Shoror's face lit up with joy and he abruptly dashed towards the hallway. Just as Han Shoror raised his head and was about to call out, Clark, who had felt the boundary shatter, suddenly leapt through Han Shoror's window and swiftly fled outside. His figure was also a bit ragged. It looked like he also knew that his plan to kill Han Shoror this time would be for naught once the boundary shattered. Therefore, he immediately retreated. Opening his mouth, Han Shoror didn't call out. Now that Clark had left, even if Han Shoror called out, it wouldn't have much effect. Because of the soundproofing, the students in Han Shoror's dormitory and hallway didn't wake up the students in the other dormitories even though they'd experienced an extremely dangerous fight. Looking at the shattered dormitory door, Han Shoror exhaled lightly with lingering fear and silently walked in. The 3 original demons that he'd painstakingly refined had been destroyed by the fighting aura within Clark's body because they needed to restrain Clark. However, it was because of these 3 original demons that Han Shoror's life was saved. Although the 3 original demons had been destroyed, Clark's body had also been injured by the original demons gnawing away at his essence blood. Clark needed to recuperate his body in a short period of time and it would be difficult for him to make a second move. That's good as well. If the old doesn't go, the new won't come. It looks like I can start refining yin demons of an even higher level. When I advance to the true demon stage and refine the Earth Elite zombie and yin demons into the world, that will be the time of your death. Han Shoror murmured to himself. The next day, morning. Lawrence found Han Shoror as promised and the two sat down in Han Shoror's dormitory. Clark came last night and I almost didn't see you. The door was still in pieces and there were obvious signs of a fight in the surroundings. Han Shoror didn't hide anything and got straight to the point. Startled, Lawrence said in surprise, "That fast?" Nodding, Han Shoror said, I didn't expect it either. However, Clark was also injured and shouldn't make another move in the short term. You don't have to worry about anything. You injured Clark? Lawrence looked at Han Shoror in disbelief and asked in shock. That's right, but you're wrong if you think my strength is greater than Clark's. It was pure luck that I was able to injure him. If I hadn't dodged in time, I definitely would have been killed by him. This person is truly difficult to deal with. Han Shoror's face was grave as he said lowly. Lawrence didn't need Han Shoror's reminder to understand how difficult it was to provoke Clark since he was more familiar with him. Although Han Shoror didn't say anything about last night's battle, Lawrence could tell from Han Shoror's expression that it must have been intense. No matter what methods Han Shoror used to injure Clark, this meant that Han Shoror wasn't a simple character. Therefore, Lawrence's opinion of Han Shoror rose a few notches after hearing Han Shoror's words. With my understanding of Clark, it won't be easy for us to find him when he's injured. Therefore, he must have returned to a safe place to recuperate at this time. We can only postpone our plan to kill him. Lawrence thought for a moment and slowly opened his mouth to speak. Alright then, I just happen to have some matters to take care of, so we'll stop here for today. I'll come find you in about 10 days and we'll have a good chat then. Lawrence nodded in agreement after hearing Han Shoror's words. Lawrence took a deep look at Han Shoror before bidding farewell and leaving the place. Han Shoror also carefully walked towards the back of the mountain. He planned on first going to the Cemetery of Death to raise the Earth Elite Zombie and then taking care of the Forest Trolls matters. Chapter 140. When he returned to the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror immediately took out the materials needed to refine the Earth Elite Zombie and placed them on top of the place of extreme Earth outside. Han Shoror wasn't in a hurry to make his move. He first ran through the refinement method of the Earth Elite Zombie in his mind, thoroughly considering the steps and areas he needed to pay attention to before making his move. First, he found the place with the densest Earth Chi in the place of extreme Earth. Han Shoror took out the Demon Slayer edge and dug out a corpse cave, using it as a place to store the zombies. All sorts of materials were placed precisely where they should be, according to the layout of the formation. Han Shoror's mind was fully focused, and he thought through everything clearly. He didn't hesitate to complete all the arrangements with high efficiency when the materials were in his hands. When a ball of black mud was placed in a concave area that Han Shoror had set up in the place of extreme Earth, a faint breeze suddenly blew through the place of extreme Earth. Suddenly, there seemed to be a faint breeze blowing in the place of extreme Earth. However, upon closer inspection, one would discover that it wasn't a breeze. Instead, it was some grayish-brown gas that was slowly gathering towards the corpse cave in the center from all directions of the place of extreme Earth. The gathering of the Earth essence was a sign that the formation was complete. When Han Shoror saw this situation suddenly occur, he couldn't help but smile and start summoning zombie warriors with necromancy incantations. 3 zombie warriors suddenly appeared in front of Han Shoror under Han Shoror's summons. In principle, any zombie warrior had an extremely high chance of becoming an Earth Elite Zombie with boundless power under the special arrangements of the place of extreme Earth. However, as the main material, zombie warriors, if they had better functions in all aspects, then their chances of becoming an Earth Elite Zombie would naturally be higher. Taking a deep breath, Han Shoror once again summoned 3 zombie warriors. When the 6 zombie warriors appeared, Han Shoror ordered them to attack each other. Han Shoror didn't know which zombie warrior was better. Therefore, this method of having them attack each other was the simplest and most effective method. His eyebrows furrowed, Han Shoror watched the 6 zombie warriors fight each other. After only a few minutes, Han Shoror immediately ordered them to stop. This was because Han Shoror had already set his eyes on the largest zombie warrior. Its fighting strength seemed to be a level higher. If he let them fight to the end, then this zombie warrior would certainly not be whole. This would obviously affect the refinement of the Earth Elite Zombie. Everything was now in place. Han Shoror once again went through all the things he needed to pay attention to in his mind. He used his amazing eyesight to reflect everything in the place of extreme Earth into his eyes. After ensuring that he hadn't missed any details, he finally gave the zombie warrior the order and slowly descended into the corpse cave. As soon as the zombie warrior entered the cave, its body was already covered by the essence of Earth. The grayish-brown essence of Earth flowed in a mysterious way and slowly seeped into every corner of the zombie warrior's skeleton. The zombie warrior seemed to be a bit uncomfortable in the beginning as its body trembled slightly. However, after the absorption of the essence of Earth lasted for a while, the zombie warrior seemed to be enjoying it very much. With a faint smile, Han Shoror suddenly waved his hand. Colorful soil suddenly fell into the corpse cave, completely covering the zombie warrior in the blink of an eye. The cave was also flattened by the strange soil. However, the essence of Earth had already slowly flowed into the corpse cave and seeped into the strange soil, continuing to bore into the zombie warrior's corpse. Han Shoror had already done what he needed to do. All he needed to do now was wait. Han Shoror only knew that the zombie warrior would only be able to become an Earth Elite Zombie when all the essence of Earth in this place of extreme Earth had been absorbed and digested. However, Han Shoror wasn't too sure how long this process would take. Therefore, when he saw that the situation was on track, Han Shoror felt that there was no need to stay any longer. After exiting the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror didn't delay his training of magical yuan and magic as he headed south of the dark forest. It was indeed a bit inconvenient without the surveillance of the original demons. It was a good thing that Han Shoror's 5 senses were extraordinary and he didn't encounter any major dangers along the way. Deep into the night, the snow-covered dark forest seemed to be draped in a layer of silver yarn. Under the illumination of the dim moonlight, the entire dark forest was enveloped in a tranquil and peaceful atmosphere. Han Shoror sat cross-legged on the thick branches of a towering tree, his entire body shivering. Clouds of thick, jet-black magical energy curled around Han Shoror's body, and the bright moonlight was completely unable to penetrate this layer of darkness. After Han Shoror had swallowed the last divine brain fruit, Han Shoror endured the immense pain as he forcefully endured the effects of the divine brain fruit, and finally reached the point of breaking through to the mold spirit realm. Along with the pain in his brain, the essence of blood slowly condensed in his lower abdomen, mixed with the magical energy and Han Shoror's thoughts and soul, gradually evolving into the embryonic form of a demon infant. Clouds of magical energy flowed out from Han Shoror's capillaries. The demon infant was the symbol of the true demon stage, and its existence meant that Han Shoror had broken through from the mold spirit realm. This stage was a watershed in the training of demonic magic. Only when the demon infant was formed would one truly be considered to have become a demon. Therefore, it was also the most dangerous moment. Maintaining this position, the magical yuan within Han Shoror's body flowed madly into the demon infant. The demon infant, which had originally been only the size of a thumb, absorbed Han Shoror's magical yuan and Han Shoror's essence of blood at the same time. Gradually, it grew larger and shone with a faint halo of light. In this manner, after 7 days, the demon infant was now the size of a fist. Just as Han Shoror's magical yuan was exhausted and his head was a bit dizzy, his body trembled and he fell from the tree, completely devoid of strength. Crying out in pain, Han Shoror was in a state of panic when he suddenly felt the demon infant, which had been absorbing the essence of blood and magical yuan, establish a mysterious connection with him. The magical yuan that had been continuously absorbed by the demon infant suddenly erupted like a mountain torrent, surging back into his limbs and bones. According to Han Shoror's will, the magical yuan that seemed to be affected by the demon infant seemed to have undergone a qualitative change. Han Shoror himself also seemed to have been reborn. With a thought, the mystical glacial spellfire began to circulate. After the magical yuan was infused, 2 balls of flames, one red and one purple, soared into the sky, as if he was holding 2 oil lamps in his palms, appearing quite peculiar and mysterious. With a wave of his left and right hands, the 2 balls of flames, one red and one purple, suddenly flew out and landed on 2 small trees. One of the small trees was charred and emitted thick smoke, while the other froze in an instant, breaking into several pieces with a crack and falling to the ground. Now in the true demon realm, Han Shoror could finally skillfully control the mystical glacial spellfire. He could form the purple and red spellfire in his palms, and could even leave his hands to attack. This was the wondrous effect of the magical yuan's qualitative change. The demon slayer edge tore through the air, its shrill howl enchanting and soul-stealing. Some of the surrounding trees and hills were broken and exploded under the demon slayer edge's piercing. By the time the demon slayer edge made a circle in the air and returned to Han Shoror's hands, the surroundings had already become a scene of devastation, like the aftermath of a great battle. Now, he could once again refine the yin demons, which were a level higher than the original demons. With the demon infant's effects, Han Shoror only needed to practice the art of the demonic ninth heavens to truly be able to fly through the air, and travel 1,000 miles in a day would be as easy as turning over his hand. Last time when he'd faced Clark, Han Shoror had been on the defensive from beginning to end. However, Han Shoror had already reached the true demon realm. If he were to face Clark again, Han Shoror was confident that he would be able to contend against Clark. He wouldn't be able to only dodge and evade like before. Han Shoror then continued to practice the art of the demonic ninth heavens as he headed deeper into the southern part of the dark forest. 2 days later, Han Shoror finally appeared outside the forest troll's village. Looking into the distance, Han Shoror saw traces of battle outside the village where the forest troll lived. Some large trees had collapsed, arrows had been fired, and some broken weapons. All of this indicated that the forest troll must have experienced a battle before this. Han Shoror didn't need to think too much to be certain that the battle between the forest troll and the elves had already begun. Han Shoror circled the area and didn't find any traces of the elves. He didn't know if the battle between the two sides had ended. After summoning Little Skull, Han Shoror and Little Skull slowly walked towards the village where the forest troll lived. When they arrived outside, a few forest troll warriors walked out in full armor. When the forest troll warriors saw that it was Han Shoror and Little Skull, they all cheered at the same time, loudly shouting Dadara, and solemnly brought Han Shoror and Little Skull into the village. Along the way, Han Shoror saw that the forest troll in the surroundings were all holding weapons in their hands, ready to fight at any moment. Even the troll women and elders far away from the village were holding weapons and preparing food. After paying attention, Han Shoror discovered that the number of forest troll in the village was even greater than the last time he'd left. After a rough estimate, there were at least 800 adult forest troll in the entire village that could fight. Compared to the last time Han Shoror had come, there were 300 more. However, the forest trolls' weapons and equipment were obviously insufficient. The forest trolls at the back were only wielding coarse wooden sticks and even rocks, as well as some rusty iron weapons. Some of them had even begun to munch on tree bark and weeds. It appeared that they were already running low on food. Chapter 141. Han Shoror's arrival was met with unanimous cheers from the forest troll. The old priest trembled as he walked over and immediately knelt down, crying out with tears in his eyes, "Goddess Dadara and her emissary, you've finally returned." Taking in the situation around him, Han Shoror suddenly had an inexplicable feeling in his heart. Logically speaking, these forest troll were the greediest of plunderers and Han Shoror should loathe them. But now that he saw these forest troll treat him as a divine emissary and listen to all of his orders, Han Shoror suddenly felt that they weren't so detestable after all. Plundering was the nature of this race. According to the rules of survival of the fittest in the dark forest, their actions were acceptable. Just like how some large magical creatures had a natural instinct to hunt down lower-level magical creatures to eat, the forest troll did the same. All the forest troll, young and old, were looking at him anxiously as he looked around. Their gazes were the most devout trust of a religious disciple, as if they could die and live without a second thought with just one command from him. This kind of feeling made Han Shoror feel a bit peculiar. "Don't worry, your goddess Dadara will never abandon you." Looking around, Han Shoror was silent for a while and then spoke in a low, solemn voice. The old priest translated with tears brimming in his eyes. All of the forest trolls raised their empty sacks and cheered loudly. It seemed that Han Shoror's one promise was enough to make them forget all of their predicament. He took out sack after sack of rations from his space ring and piled them on the stone ground that had been cleared of snow. All kinds of thick cotton clothing and daily necessities appeared in front of the forest troll, causing the forest troll, who'd endured the hardships of winter, to dance with joy. "These things have all been prepared for you this winter. The rations in these warehouses are enough for you to safely survive this winter without raiding. Goddess Dadara has gone out to gather these things for her people." Han Shoror's low voice rang out melodiously throughout the entire forest troll village. All the forest troll knelt down under the old priest's tearful lead. The troll leader then commanded his men to carry the rations and daily necessities back to the cave behind the village under the old priest's orders. Han Shoror followed behind the old priest and came to the newly refurbished temple in the village. Not only was there a little skull, but even a statue of Han Shoror had been erected. This made Han Shoror feel even more peculiar. It was as if he'd truly become their protector. "When I came in just now, I saw traces of fighting outside the village. Did those annoying elves start a war again?" After entering with Little Skull, Han Shoror gave an order. Little Skull sat at the head of the table, and Han Shoror sat down beside Little Skull. He looked at the old priest and asked, "Reporting to the oracle, it is indeed those annoying elves who have come to start a war again. But don't worry, oracle, your brave people will never let the elves have their way. Under the radiance of Goddess Dadara, the elves will definitely retreat pathetically once again. The old priest's face blossomed with divine light as he shouted confidently. Waving his hand, Han Shoror stopped the old priest from continuing his bragging. He thought for a moment and said, "The rations and daily necessities we've brought this time should be enough for you all to use for the entire winter. If there are merchants who want to trade for those weird things from you, you can trade with them. Also, don't go out and plunder for the time being without my orders. If we're going to do something, we'll do it in large numbers. Goddess Dadara will find a target and notify you, so you don't have to worry about not having any work to do. Also, how many elves have come this time, and when did they start fighting with you? Tell me everything in detail." Under Han Shoror's orders, the old priest didn't ask why and agreed to Han Shoror's requests. He immediately ordered a forest troll warrior beside him to inform the troll leader of Han Shoror's 2 requests. The old priest then explained the battle with the elves in detail to Han Shoror. From the old priest's words, Han Shoror knew that the elves would always have a great battle with the forest troll every winter. This was because it was only at this time that the forest troll's rations, daily necessities, and weapons could not be guaranteed. This was also the time when the forest troll's battle strength was at its lowest. This time, the elves were the same as previous years, taking advantage of the fact that the forest troll couldn't plunder in the cold of winter to launch an attack. However, the elves were inferior to the forest troll in numbers and couldn't gain the absolute upper hand every time. They just launched a probing attack before hiding away to discuss their next step. From the old priest's words, Han Shoror knew that the forest troll had many tribes of various sizes within the dark forest. Due to the duty of protecting the Great Dadara sacred ground and the fact that there were over 500 forest troll warriors in this tribe, the old priest's forest troll tribe had a certain degree of restraint over the other forest troll races in the dark forest. Now that Little Skull and Han Shoror had appeared, the old priest used the name of Little Skull and Han Shoror to issue an order and gather all the forest trolls scattered throughout the dark forest, intending to teach the elves a painful lesson. Because the Great Dadara sacred ground was the goddess of the forest troll, the influence of Little Skull's appearance was immeasurable. Therefore, over 300 forest troll from 4 small tribes had rushed over in just 10 days, intending to worship the radiance of Little Skull. According to the old priest's words, the forest troll of each tribe in the dark forest would gather together in a short amount of time. When that time came, not only would the elves' attack be difficult to achieve the desired results, they might even suffer great losses. Han Shoror had originally been worried that the elves would slaughter more than half of the forest troll. He hadn't thought that because of Little Skull's rallying power, the forest trolls scattered throughout the dark forest, who had never interacted with each other, would all rush over as if on a pilgrimage. From the old priest's words, Han Shoror knew that when these forest troll all gathered together, their numbers would be no less than 2,000. There seemed to only be a few hundred elves in the dark forest. Although they had a few sharpshooters and mags, it was very likely that they would lose everything when faced with the forest troll, who outnumbered them several times over. Rubbing his head, Han Shoror felt a bit of a headache. He thought for a moment and said, "It looks like the elves should be the ones worried this time. It's said that the elves are quite wealthy. I think we should rob them all. What does the messenger mean?" The old priest started and asked in confusion. "Do you know where the elves live in the dark forest?" Han Shoror thought for a moment and asked. The old priest started and furrowed his brow in thought. He finally said, "We know the general location, but we've never gone in." Nodding, Han Shoror smiled and said, "Then that's good. When the forest troll of the other tribes come over, they'll stay behind and hold the elves back. Our tribe will head to where the elves live and take advantage of this opportunity to rob the elves' homes. But messenger, why don't we stay behind and gather with our brothers from the other tribes to kill all the elven warriors together? These elves are truly despicable. They'll always cause trouble and endlessly sabotage our operations. They'll even take advantage of the winter to start battles with us every year. Many of our tribesmen have been killed by the elves in recent years." The old priest started and finally didn't blindly listen to Han Shoror's suggestion for the first time. Instead, he asked in confusion. "It's the nature of us forest troll to rob, not kill. In addition, the elves in the dark forest aren't the entirety of this tribe. If we kill all the elves here, it'll bring us even more trouble. There's no need for this. To Han Shoror, there was indeed no need for the forest troll and the elves to fight to the death. In addition, Han Shoror didn't want to kill all the elves either. What Han Shoror needed now was wealth. He needed large amounts of money to support his training in magical yuan and magic. This was why he'd made this suggestion. Although he still didn't quite understand, the old priest didn't continue to speak. After a few more days, more forest trolls rushed over from all directions one after another. After Han Shoror and Little Skull received a tidal wave of cheers and devout worship, a portion of the foreign forest troll stayed behind to face off against the original elves. Han Shoror, Little Skull, and the 500 forest troll from the old priest's tribe headed towards the village where the elves lived. In the frigid winter, the 500 forest trolls carried enough rations, thick cotton clothing, and sharp weapons in their hands as they headed deeper into the dark forest. Chapter 142. The depths of winter had arrived, and the frigid winds howled harshly, bringing with it a flurry of snowflakes. The bone-chilling cold made the forest troll, who had lived in the dark forest for a long time, feel their hands and feet turn icy cold. It was a good thing that Han Shoror had brought enough rations and thick clothing with him this time. Otherwise, this harsh winter would have been a disaster for the forest troll. Han Shoror and the forest troll ventured deeper into the dark forest over the next few days. They didn't head south this time, but headed west from the start. Han Shoror had the forest troll build a simple palanquin over these few days, and he silently trained in the art of the demonic ninth heavens. The art of the demonic ninth heavens required magical yuan to be infused into the meridians of the hands and feet, and then used a special method to activate the magical yuan to fly into the sky. After the foundation training of the 3 levels of the solid, open, and mold spirit demonic arts, Han Shoror, who had now reached the true demon realm, was much faster in training the art of the demonic ninth heavens than when he'd first trained the mystical glacial spellfire. Because his meridians had already been expanded and strengthened, Han Shoror didn't feel the slightest hindrance when he followed the path of the art of the demonic ninth heavens. In the following days, Han Shoror didn't continue to stay in the palanquin. He found a random excuse to stay in the back and secretly tried flying with the art of the demonic ninth heavens. Knowing how to use it was one thing, but there were still a few tricks to truly fly in the air. Han Shoror tried many times, but was only able to rise into the air. He still wasn't proficient enough in controlling the direction, and fell from the sky many times. On this day, the heavy snow stopped wreaking havoc on the land, and the forest troll also stopped in front of a mountain valley. Han Shoror, who was still trying to quickly finish training the art of the demonic ninth heavens, immediately stopped training when he discovered that the forest troll had suddenly stopped and quickly rushed to the front from the back. Emissary, that mountain valley should be where the elves live. A long time ago, our 2 children saw a large number of elves in the vicinity. When Han Shoror walked in front of the old priest, he pointed at the snow-covered valley and explained to Han Shoror respectfully. Taking a deep breath, Han Shoror squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. Unfortunately, because of the snow covering the trees and ground, Han Shoror could not see what was in the distance. Han Shoror chanted a mysterious magic incantation in a low voice. Then, an oily green halo flew out from Han Shoror and headed towards the snow-covered mountain Tanai. Life detection was a mid-rank necromancy spell, and one that Han Shoror had only recently mastered. Life detection was a spell that did not have any attack function. As the name suggested, it was only used to search for life. It was useful in unknown environments. As soon as the spell was deployed, Han Shoror squinted his eyes to feel. Where the life detection spell passed, Han Shoror did not feel any traces of life. When the spell circled the outskirts of the mountain valley once, it disappeared without a trace due to the exhaustion of mental strength. There are no traces of life in the mountain valley, but we can go in and take a look. If the elves really live here, they must have left some clues on the trees. If we can find the houses that the elves live in here, then that would be the best. Han Shoror thought for a moment and instructed the old priest. Han Shoror and the forest troll warriors were in front, and the troll hunters and priests were behind them. They cautiously and slowly made their way into the depths of the mountain valley. Their feet made crunching sounds as they stepped on the snow. When the troll warriors in front of them entered the mountain valley, They waved the weapons in their hands and shoveled away the snow on the surrounding trees. They kicked the snow on the ground with force, wanting to see if there were any clues left behind. A cry of surprise came from a young forest troll. When Han Shuor's ears caught the cry of surprise, his body shot in that direction like lightning. But when Han Shuor stood at the source of the sound, he suddenly discovered that the forest troll that had just cried out had disappeared. Furrowing his brow, Han Shuor listened attentively to the movements in his surroundings. He then walked a few circles on the snowy ground and finally stood on a messy patch of snow. He suddenly stomped down with force. With a plop, Han Shuor's body suddenly dropped down and landed in a pitch-black hole in the span of a breath. The young forest troll's cry of surprise came from a remote corner not far away. In the pitch-black hole, it was very ear-piercing. Han Shuor's body had long since adapted to the darkness. He rolled his eyes and Han Shuor discovered that the cave he was in led to somewhere underground. After careful observation, Han Shuor discovered that the cave entrance was very wide, and there were traces of footsteps as it extended downwards. Could it be that the elves who worshipped the goddess of nature and loved the forest had all come to live underground? Han Shuor was a little confused. After a momentary daze, he activated the art of the demonic ninth heavens and his body slowly rose into the air. When he landed, he clenched his fist and punched out, destroying the snow that covered his head. The forest troll that had fallen carelessly cried out in surprise for a while. His eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, and he groped his way up. A strange whistling sound suddenly came from the depths of the ground. Han Shuor's heart jumped, and he once again released the life detection spell, targeting the source of the sound deep underground. As soon as the life detection spell was released, Han Shuor sensed an enormous amount of traces of life. He was immediately startled and abruptly rushed out of the cave, raising his head and letting out a shrill howl. The old priest heard Han Shuor's cry and approached from afar inquiringly. In the process, the forest troll that had fallen down also climbed out from the hole. The troll warriors that had been scouting the situation in the surroundings all rushed over with their weapons in hand. After clearing away the snow at the entrance of the hole, a deep hole that could fit 3 or 4 people side by side was revealed. A few arrows whistled through the air at high speed, startling the forest trolls who'd craned their necks to see what was going on. The old priest was furious, and was about to give the order to attack the life in the hole, but Han Shuor extended a hand to stop him. The elves loved nature, and probably wouldn't live in the dark underground. Han Shuor was a bit curious as to what kind of people were down there, so he didn't let the forest troll attack immediately. With a few whooshes, a few figures shot out from the hole. Sharp ears and handsome looks were the unique characteristics of the elves, but these elves had black and dark purple skin and silver-white hair, which made them seem so different. "It's the dark elves!" The old priest cried out in surprise when he saw these strange elves appear. With the old priest's shout, Han Shuor finally reacted. As elves, they had abandoned peace and nature, and their faith in the goddess of nature, and instead worshipped the Queen of Darkness, Rose. They had lived in the dark underground for a long time, and their skin had turned black and dark purple. They had evil personalities, and they burned, killed, and plundered everywhere. They existed as a matriarchal family, with females as the main leaders. In the underground world, they were the same as the forest troll, an evil race that was full of evil deeds. As the first few dark elves rushed out, more dark elves slowly surged out. After they appeared, they first guarded the hole, holding weapons in their hands as they stared unkindly at Han Shuor and the forest troll. Han Shuor waved his hand, indicating that the old priest shouldn't act rashly for the time being. He slowly spread out towards the back, but kept his weapons pointed at the dark elves that were gradually appearing, guarding against any sudden attacks. Each of the beautiful and revealing female dark elves had an impressive figure. Even in the cold winter season, they didn't seem willing to cover up their skin. Although their dark purple skin was strange, it had another kind of magical attraction. After a while, a coquettish dark elf noblewoman also walked out. She wore a soft fur coat that faintly revealed her beautiful legs and voluptuous breasts. This beautiful dark elf madam looked at the forest troll around her in surprise after walking out of the cave. She smiled coquettishly and asked in the common language, "So it's the brave troll friends. Why have you come here? The old priest naturally knew that he'd found the wrong person at this time. As a sage of the forest troll, the old priest's knowledge was extraordinary, and he naturally understood that these evil dark elves weren't good people either. He snorted lightly and responded, "Our children have discovered traces of large numbers of elves nearby. Because we forest troll have an irreconcilable grudge with the elves, we've come to destroy these elves." The coquettish madam's attitude became much better after these words were spoken. She nodded and said, "We also have an irreconcilable grudge with them who live above ground. Every once in a while, the surface elves will come here and try to enter the underground world to attack us. The large number of elves you've discovered must be coming here to start a war with us. Heh, I've long since heard of the godly bravery of you trolls above ground. It looks like we have a common enemy." The old priest fell silent after her words and then turned to ask Hanshaw respectfully, "Emissary, what should we do next?" Hanshaw wanted to rob these dark elves, but he didn't know just how many of them there were, nor did he know how strong their fighting strength was. Therefore, he pondered inwardly. The coquettish dark elf madam was quite surprised at the old priest's question towards Hanshaw. Although Hanshaw was wearing a black robe that concealed his entire body, his build was noticeably smaller than that of the forest troll. It was obvious that they weren't of the same race. The old priest's respectful attitude naturally surprised the beautiful madam. "Brave friends, our family is currently facing an attack from a dark dragon. If you're willing to lend a helping hand, we can offer a cart of gold and jewels as our greatest thanks. If you can kill that dark dragon, everything he has will belong to you." The dark elf madam suddenly opened her mouth at this moment when she saw Hanshaw standing there silently. Hanshaw started. He hadn't thought that the dark elves of this family would be facing an attack from a dark dragon. As an evil dragon, dark dragons also like to live in the dark underground world. It was indeed very unlucky for the dark elves to run into a dark dragon. Frowning, Hanshaw thought for a bit and felt that this dark elf's proposal was a bit tempting. Although the dark dragon's strength was extraordinary, it shouldn't be impossible to kill him with the dark elves of this family and the power of 500 forest troll. Every single dragon had a treasure that made people tremble. Hence, the benefits obtained after killing a dragon were irresistible to everyone. Let's take a look at the underground world first. If we can deal with that dark dragon, we'll agree to your proposal. Hanshaw thought for a bit and said, "I dare guarantee that with the help of your 500 brave troll friends, that dark dragon will die without a doubt. I'm Dana. Welcome to the underground world with us." The beautiful dark elf madam said happily and then instructed the dark elves. The dark elves who had just rushed out of the cave re-entered the cave one by one under Dana's orders. Finally, Dana lifted her hips and walked down, beckoning to Hanshaw and the old priest. Following behind them into the underground world, they could take the opportunity to retreat if anything went wrong. Therefore, when he saw the dark elves go down first and Dana stay behind to take care of them, Hanshaw felt that there shouldn't be any danger and nodded to the old priest. With Hanshaw and the old priest in front and Little Skull in the middle, the 500 forest troll descended from the cave entrance one after another and walked towards the underground world where the dark elves lived. The deeper they went, the wider the cave entrance became. There were even some reddish-brown stones growing in the depths, emitting a faint light and making the underground world less dark. Chapter 143. The group walked underground for a long time, and Hanshaw discovered that the cave entrance was getting wider and wider. Later on, there were all sorts of complicated paths that led in all directions. At this moment, Hanshaw focused his attention and took a look at his surroundings, memorizing the path they had taken to come here in order to prevent himself from being unable to find the way back when he returned. When their footsteps slowed down and Dana led Hanshaw and the others to walk on foot, Hanshaw lifted his head and saw that the glowing reddish-brown rocks hung high above, just like the sunset glow on the ground. At a glance, apart from the fact that the sky above was shrouded in dark brown rocks, the scenery around them wasn't much different from the world above. It was just that it wasn't as cold as above, and the world below seemed to be a bit warmer. There are also a few races living in the underground world. Apart from us dark elves, there are also goblins, dwarfs, lizardmen, and other races. There are also super magical creatures with astonishing destructive power like the dark dragon. Although there are some differences between the underground world and the world above, the overall difference isn't that great. Dana explained with a dainty smile when she saw that Han Shoror and the old priest were looking excitedly in all directions. Her charming eyes seemed to be gazing at Han Shoror affectionately. Dark elves were naturally lascivious, and the female elves were even more so. As the matriarch of the dark elf family, Dana was naturally no exception. Han Shoror understood the meaning behind her gaze with a single glance. Why did that dark dragon attack your family, and where does he live? Han Shoror didn't pay any attention to Dana's gaze and asked her about business with a frown. We didn't have any disputes with the dark dragon, but the lizard men used some unknown method to bribe the dark dragon to attack us. Recently, our family has been fighting over a piece of fertile land with the lizard men, and a few battles have occurred in between. The lizard men found this dark dragon from who knows where after they were defeated. Dana's face was a bit distressed when Han Shoror brought up serious matters. She sighed deeply as she spoke. How many people did you send to deal with the dark dragon? What methods does he have? Will we be of any use with our help? Han Shoror continued to ask. Our family has over 300 dark elf warriors and has already fought the dark dragon once. The dark dragon's body is very sturdy, with only its head and neck being a bit weaker. It can spit out corrosive dragon breath, and can also spit out flames that seem to be mixed with magma. We used magic and arrows to attack it from afar. We've lost over 20 dark elves during this time, but we've also successfully wounded it. It's now hiding in a swamp to recuperate. If you add 500 forest troll warriors, I'm certain we can kill it. Dana answered confidently in response to Han Shoror's question. Han Shoror didn't speak again afterwards. Dark elves continuously gathered along the way, and when they finally arrived at a dark, muddy swamp, the originally few dozen dark elves had already increased to over 300. Pay up first, we've decided to help you. Han Shoror thought for a moment and suddenly said lowly. Dana was quite straightforward as she nodded with a smile. Several male dark elves pushed 2 carts in front of Han Shoror and lifted the grey cloth covering the carts, revealing a cart full of glittering gold and some jewels that sparkled with the light of jewels and jewels. Han Shoror's eyes lit up and he silently looked over the rewards. He inwardly calculated and was certain that this cart of gold and jewels was absolutely worth tens of thousands of gold coins. He hadn't thought that these dark elves would be so rich. Han Shoror thought inwardly and walked in front of the cart of gold and jewels. He used his space ring to unceremoniously store the items in the 2 carts. Han Shoror discreetly observed Dana's reaction as he did this. Han Shoror suddenly detected a trace of coldness and mockery in Dana's eyes. After reaching the true demon realm, not only had Han Shoror's 5 senses become more profound, but even his senses had become even more mysterious. Han Shoror could miraculously sense some very minute things. Just like the expression that had flashed through Dana's eyes just now, Han Shoror hadn't even paid attention to it, but he'd miraculously grasped this detail unwittingly. His thoughts moved. Han Shoror maintained his bent posture and put away the items in the 2 carts. He silently pondered the meaning of the coldness and mockery in Dana's eyes just now. His heart immediately became a bit more vigilant, and he even more inwardly calculated a few things. All right, I've put the items away. What should we do next? Lifting his head, Han Shoror looked at the swamp as he spoke to Dana. Our race doesn't have sturdy warriors, only long-range archers and mags. I'd like to have you troll warriors take the front, and then us dark elves will use archers and magic to attack from the back. Dana said matter-of-factly. Shaking his head, Han Shoror flatly refused. No, the dark dragons are just as sturdy. Our people will be throwing their lives away if we stand at the front. If you insist on this, there's no way we can do business. If the forest troll took the front, the dark dragons would be unfathomably dangerous, and the dark elves with ill intentions would be at the back. In this way, the forest troll would be attacked from both front and back, and would be in an extremely disadvantageous position. Even if Han Shoror hadn't discovered Dana's evil intentions, he still wouldn't have agreed to this suggestion. Not to mention that Han Shoror felt that Dana had other plans, so he naturally wouldn't allow this kind of situation to occur. Dana's smiling face darkened when Han Shor's words of refusal left her mouth. She then said to Han Shor with a bit of anger, "Someone has to take the front. Do you want us weak tribesmen to throw our lives away? We've paid you 2 carts of gold and jewels. Don't worry, isn't it just looking for cannon fodder to throw their lives away? Leave this to me. As long as you're responsible for luring the dark dragons out of the swamp, I'll take care of the cannon fodder. That should be fine, right?" Han Shor's voice was equally dark as he responded. A magical incantation was chanted as soon as Han Shor's words had ended, and a zombie warrior appeared out of thin air. Following Han Shor's repeated chants, even more zombie warriors and skeletal warriors, as well as some ghouls, appeared in front of Dana, forming a wall of flesh. "So you're a necromancer?" Dana nodded, but because Han Shor had only summoned zombie warriors and skeletal warriors, Dana looked at Han Shor with a bit of disdain. Han Shor didn't mind Dana's gaze at all and asked, "How about it? Can you make your move now?" "Yes, wait for me to make the arrangements. As soon as the dark dragon leaves the swamp, you summon your creatures to take it. Your troll warriors will attack from afar with us and don't give the dark dragon any chance to breathe or speak. Otherwise, it'll be very troublesome later on." Dana nodded in agreement and retreated to the side of the dark elves. She used her eyes to observe the movements of Han Shor and the others as she whispered in hushed tones. Han Shor's extraordinary ears were also put to use at this moment. After focusing his attention, Han Shor could clearly hear the contents of Dana's words. When Han Shor discovered that Dana was discussing the details of how to deal with the forest troll, he couldn't help but laugh coldly to himself. Waving his hand to call the old priest over, Han Shor moved closer to the old priest and gave a few instructions in a low voice. The old priest's expression was one of fright at first, but he reacted afterwards. He listened to Han Shor's words with a calm expression and then left to instruct the troll leader, telling him to act according to Han Shor's instructions. A young dark elf girl walked naked towards the swamp, singing melodiously as she walked. Her naked body was curvaceous in all the right places, and her dark purple skin was smooth and clean. Her butt was full and erect from the back, and her back was smooth and moving. Her entire being was filled with a bewitching beauty. Her beautiful voice sang out from her mouth, causing Han Shor's heart to run wild. When she walked to the edge of the swamp, her cute toes stepped on the soft black mud. She playfully kicked the mud, making a sound that was neither too loud nor too soft. The center of the calm swamp suddenly caved in and formed an enormous whirlpool. The whirlpool fiercely pulled in the surrounding mud. The naked dark elf girl was startled and hurriedly dodged away in a panic, avoiding the pull of the whirlpool. The whirlpool that had been in the center slowly changed its position and quickly shifted towards the girl. Just as it was about to reach the edge of the swamp, an enormous crashing sound rang out from the whirlpool as a pitch-black dragon head abruptly poked out. Its red eyes were like 2 lanterns, and its back and sharp claws were revealed. Its body snaked to the rear of the swamp for more than 10 meters, and its body was very large. This was the first time Han Shor had seen a dragon up close, and he was indescribably shocked. "Girl, play with me, don't run away." After the dark dragon came out, it opened its mouth and began to tease, swaying its enormous body as it chased after the dark elf girl. Chapter 144. It really was a lascivious dragon. Han Shor cursed inwardly and gave the order. The dark creatures that had just been summoned slowly walked out from the surrounding cover, their eyes aimed at the dark elves, planning to plot against the dark dragon and the dark elves together. Come on, come on." The dark dragon laughed lewdly as its 10-meter-long body flew out from the swamp, causing the mud in the swamp to fly and making rumbling sounds. The naked dark elf girl had a panicked expression as she ran for her life towards where Han Shor, Dana, and the others were hiding. Her perky breasts rippled with enchanting waves, and her slender legs were strong and powerful. Some mud stuck to her exquisite body, but not only did it not seem dirty, it even had a different kind of charm. When the dark elf girl finally reached the area where Han Shor and the others were guarding, Han Shor gave the dark creatures an order. A dozen zombie warriors, a few dozen skeleton warriors, and a few ghouls suddenly walked out from the cover, charging towards the lascivious dark dragon in a grandiose manner. At the same time, Han Shoror called out, and the forest troll warriors stayed where they were, while the troll hunters threw sharp spears and javelins at the dark dragon that had just flown into the sky. The dark elves naturally didn't let their guard down. Almost at the same time, they shot a sky full of arrows, as well as some dark elf magic, at the dark dragon. "Damn it, it's you lowly races again." The dark dragon roared and opened its mouth to spit out a fierce flame. There was indeed lava mixed within, and it looked extremely powerful. "Retreat!" Han Shoror shouted, and under the old priest's shout, the forest troll quickly retreated. A fierce flame sprayed where it had just been, instantly setting the dry weeds on the ground ablaze. All sorts of spears and javelins, as well as the dark elves' arrows and magic attacks, landed on the dark dragon's sturdy body, but didn't have much effect. The attacks aimed at the dark dragon's neck, eyes, and head were all deflected by the dark dragon's iron claws, landing on the other side. The dark dragon's enormous body flew through the air, arriving above the zombie warriors and skeleton warriors that Han Shoror had summoned. Its iron claws suddenly pressed down, crushing the skeleton warriors into pieces. The zombie warriors were also torn apart when touched by the dragon's claws. As expected, they could only be used as cannon fodder. The dark dragon's strength was within Han Shoror's expectations. Han Shoror didn't feel any heartache as he watched the dark creatures disappear in droves under the dark dragon's attacks. He winked at the old priest from afar. The attacks of the dark elves kept appearing, and the magic archers in the back started shooting icicle-like arrows. Some of the arrows even reached the back of the dark dragon's body. As long as they hit something, they would immediately explode, causing a huge commotion and making the dark dragon even more furious. "You cowardly and lowly beings will die under the wrath of the great Gilbert today." The dark dragon Gilbert roared angrily as he continued to fly forward under the attacks of the icicle arrows and exploding arrows. As he flew close to the ground, his dragon claws swept up and destroyed all of the dark creatures that Han Shoror had summoned. The dark elves quickly dodged to the back after firing their attacks under Matriarch Dana's orders, attempting to get behind the forest troll to deal with the dark dragon. Unfortunately, Han Shoror had already given the order. Before the dark elves could make a move, all of the forest troll had given up on attacking the dark dragon and fled to the back without a care for their own safety, fleeing even faster than the dark elves. "Block the stone walls!" Han Shoror yelled out explosively when he arrived at a small mountain valley not far behind the center of the forest trolls. The old priest gave the order, and the forest troll leader gave the order. A dozen forest troll warriors stood on high ground and threw down rolling stones, instantly sealing off the valley and blocking the dark elves that were attempting to enter. Han Shoror had just eavesdropped on the dark elf matriarch Dana's words and knew that she had long since prepared a large number of rolling stones around the valley. She planned to evacuate the dark elves after provoking the dark dragon's rage, leaving the forest troll to fight the dark dragon. When the two sides finished fighting, they would appear to deal with the surviving side. That way, neither the dark dragon nor the forest troll would be able to escape the dark elves' palms. Dana's plan was wishful thinking. If she really carried it out like this, then Han Shoror and the forest troll would really die here. It was a good thing that Han Shoror's hearing was astonishing and he heard all of Dana's poisonous plans. This allowed the forest troll to move even faster and rush to the valley before Dana and the others could react. They used the stones that the dark elves had prepared beforehand to block the valley. "What's the meaning of this?" Dana finally revealed a look of fear as she snarled at Han Shoror and the old priest through the stone walls. "Nothing, I've discovered that this dark dragon is too hard to deal with. We're cancelling our deal just now and aren't planning on continuing. I'll definitely return the 2 carts of gold and jewels to you after you've finished off the dark dragon. I'll also compensate you for your losses. I'm really sorry." Han Shoror shrugged and apologized sincerely to Dana. Dana would never have thought that Han Shoror would make a fool out of her at the most critical moment. Although Han Shoror had a sincere expression of apology on his face, his eyes were cold and it was obvious that he was up to no good. How could Dana not see through it? She felt her hands and feet go cold when she thought of her own plans. She suddenly felt her head swell and she was so anxious that she didn't know what to do. Lowly and cowardly life, Meet the wrath of Gilbert. Gilbert snarled and spat out thick, acidic venom from his mouth. A dozen or so dark elves couldn't dodge in time and cried out in agony after being covered by the venom. Fight it out with him. A handsome male dark elf roared angrily. The longbow with intricate patterns carved in his hands suddenly swelled as if it was sucking something. The dark elf's originally tall and slender body seemed to be swallowed by the bow as his body quickly shrank. "Don't!" Dana cried out loudly, her expression a bit frantic. "Hurry up and give the order, otherwise my sacrifice won't be of any use." The male dark elf roared angrily as his body gradually shrank to the size of a skeleton. The presence of life poured into the strange bow and the bow blossomed with a faint black radiance, looking a bit sinister and bizarre. Han Shoror looked at the bow in astonishment and revealed an extremely curious gaze. After absorbing the dark elf's presence of life, an arrow wrapped in an inky black gloss magically appeared within the bow. As the dark elf's body shriveled up, the arrow began to exude an extremely dangerous presence. Even the arrogant dark dragon sensed the danger at this moment and charged over irritably, spewing out flames from his mouth. At this moment, the valley behind them had been blocked off by Han Shoror's order. The dark elves could only face the dark dragon's attacks and had no way out. Dana had no other choice now that things had developed to this point. She gritted her teeth and gave the order. The other dark elves stood in front of the dark elf with no regard for their own safety and unleashed all sorts of elven magic to help him resist Gilbert's attacks. In an instant, dozens of dark elves with no way out were swallowed up by the flames mixed with lava, turning into charcoal in the blink of an eye. At this moment, a mournful cry rang out as the arrow finally devoured the dark elf's presence of life. It took aim at the dark dragon and shot out with unimaginable speed, not giving dark dragon Gilbert any chance to dodge. The strange arrow condensed from black light suddenly fell on the dark dragon, then turned into a ball of black air midway, completely enveloping the enormous dark dragon Gilbert. A series of crackling sounds erupted from within the ball of black light, mixed with dark dragon Gilbert's pained cries. It looked like the dark dragon was suffering from inhuman pain. However, as a rank-surpassing magical beast, the dark dragon still aimlessly spewed out flames and venom under such a painful attack. Its body tumbled from the void to the center of the dark elves, where it was wrapped in a black cloud of air, its claws flailing everywhere. It tore apart the dark elves one by one. Even more dark elves died tragically under the attack of the flames and venom. In a few breaths' time, another 100 or so dark elves had perished just like that. The original 300 or so dark elves had now been reduced to less than 100. When the ball of black light dissipated and the dark dragon's enormous body was revealed, Han Shoror discovered that the dark dragon was bleeding profusely from head to toe. Its flesh was charred black, and its movements weren't as fast as before. It seemed that even its eyes had been injured, as if it couldn't see anything and was blindly moving about. "Get ready, we're about to become dragon slayers." Han Shoror smiled sinisterly at the old priest behind him and instructed. Chapter 145. Kill that damned dark dragon. The matriarch of the Dark Elves, Dana, was no longer as beautiful as before. Her hair was disheveled as she yelled. Because of the dark dragon's chaotic movements, the dark elves scattered in all directions to avoid him. Occasionally, they would be sprayed with flames and venom. Although she had the protection of the dark elves, Dana was still in a very difficult situation. Under Dana's orders, the remaining dark elves launched fierce attacks at the seemingly blind dark dragon. All sorts of arrows and magic fell on the dark dragon's body, causing the already wounded dark dragon to suffer even more severe injuries. As a super-rank magical beast, the dark dragon's strength was unquestionable. Even the 300 dark elves wouldn't have been able to injure the dark dragon if it hadn't been for the male elf sacrificing his life to pull that strange bow. But now, the already heavily injured dark dragon couldn't see his surroundings clearly due to the damage to his eyes. His enormous body had become a live target, and as the injuries on his body increased, his movement speed became a bit slower, and the power of his attacks wasn't as great as before. The dark elves stuck close to the stone wall where Han Shoror and the others were. Han Shoror, who'd taken in the entire situation, immediately nodded at the old priest when he saw that the dark dragon was on the verge of collapse. "Move the stone wall away, we're going out to clean up the mess." Han Shoror laughed sinisterly as he instructed the old priest. With the old priest's instructions, the troll warriors, who had long since been prepared, immediately started moving the rocks that were blocking the valley. The dark elves had made preparations beforehand to clean up the mess. Not far away, they had specially made a sloping pit. The troll warriors only needed to use a bit of strength to turn the thick sticks that the dark elves had prepared. The rocks tilted downwards and tumbled into the deep pit on the sloping ground. When all the rocks in the valley had fallen into the deep pit, the passage was finally open. Han Shoror's gaze swept across the scene calmly, and he waved his hand to give the forest troll the order to attack. Behind them, rows of javelins and pikes were hurled from the slender arms of the forest troll hunters, whistling as they surged into the midst of the remaining dark elves. Although the dark elves were already prepared, they still howled miserably in the face of the spears and javelins that filled the sky. After a wave of attacks, several dozen dark elves were nailed to death. This made the matriarch of the dark elves, Dana, so angry that she wanted to pounce on Han Shoror. "Matriarch, let's retreat," an old dark elf woman shouted. "Shameless forest troll, I'll get even with you sooner or later," Dana screamed with a sharp voice. She then turned around and gave an order, "Retreat, everyone, retreat." The surviving dark elves fled for their lives under Dana's command. Even Dana herself quickly retreated under the cover of some experts. If he did not remove the roots, the weeds would grow again when the spring breeze blew. Since he had already shed all pretense of cordiality, Han Shoror of course hardened his heart. He shouted at the old priest coldly, "Go after them and kill them all." Under the old priest's command, the troll leader gave the order to attack. The troll warriors that had rushed out of Tarnai's mountain whistled as they swarmed out and chased after the remaining dark elves. Han Shoror had his eyes on a dark elf and gave the order to Little Skull to kill it. The Little Skull wielding the bone dagger was as fast as lightning as he passed through the flickering figures of the forest troll and directly chased after the dark elf with the strange bow and arrow. The dark elf who had just exhausted his life had used that strange bow and arrow to shoot a terrifying arrow, causing the dark dragon to be covered in cuts and bruises. Han Shoror was exceedingly curious about that strange bow and arrow, so his eyes had been glued to it all this time. When the dark elf who had exhausted his life had died, the bow and arrow had been seized by another dark elf. Han Shoror had ordered Little Skull to chase after him with the goal of seizing the bow and arrow from his hands. "Awoo!" Dark Dragon Gilbert roared as his enormous body rolled rapidly, causing the ground around him to rumble loudly. When the forest troll around him saw that the dark dragon was moving again, they hurriedly avoided him. Even though he was heavily injured, the dark dragon's strength as a super-rank magical creature was still very terrifying. The forest troll had seen him wreak havoc on the dark elves just now and were deeply afraid of the dark dragon's strength. They didn't dare relax even now. The dark dragon's body rolled as he slowly retreated in the direction of the swamp. It looked like he was going to use all his strength to escape back to his nest first. When Han Shoror saw that the dark dragon wanted to escape, he looked at the fleeing dark elves and immediately yelled at the old priest, "Split half of the people to deal with the dark dragon, the rest continue to chase after the dark elves. Those who chase after the dark elves, don't go too far. Even if you can't kill all the dark elves, you must return in a short amount of time." When Han Shoror gave his order, the old priest only made a simple gesture, and half of the forest troll who had been preparing to chase after the dark elves automatically stayed behind to attack the dark dragon. The forest troll had more than double the number of dark elves. Once 200 of them joined forces to deal with the dark dragon would be injured in an instant and would have a hard time escaping. "Ah! It hurts, stop fighting, I surrender." Gilbert yelled loudly as his enormous body slowly shrank under the swirl of black light. Han Shoror started. He hadn't thought that Gilbert would actually beg for mercy. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he raised his hand to signal the forest troll to stop, wanting to see just what the dark dragon was up to. When the forest troll had surrounded the dark dragon's body gradually shrank under the swirl of black light. The dark dragon's body gradually shrank under the swirl of black light, finally transforming into a human form. A tall, slender young man with charred skin appeared, smoke rising from his head and traces of blood at the corners of his eyes. He grimaced in pain as he continuously begged for mercy. "I surrender, I surrender." Han Shoror shot a look at the old priest and pointed all their weapons at the young man. He gripped the Demon Slayer edge in his hand and slowly walked in front of the young man, saying, "There's no use in surrendering. You have many valuable items on you, including the dragon crystal, dragon tendon, and dragon horn. They're all priceless treasures, and I'll be able to obtain them all after killing you. Do you think your surrender will be of any use?" Gilbert raised his two hands and shouted out fiercely when he heard Han Shoror's words, "No, no, my value doesn't lie in the treasures on me. I can pledge my allegiance to you and sign a master and servant contract with you, as long as you give me beauties and treasures and don't kill me." Han Shoror stared blankly as soon as he heard this suggestion. His mind spun rapidly as he considered the feasibility of this method. "Don't hesitate, think about it. If I become your servant, I can help you kill and set fires, and fly everywhere to help you deal with others. As my master, you only need to give me treasures and beauties to enjoy. This is such a good deal." Young Dark Dragon Gilbert shouted loudly, as if he was deathly afraid that Han Shoror wouldn't agree. He added in the end, "I can make do if you don't have treasures, but I must have beauties to sleep with me. Otherwise, I won't do it." Han Shoror didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at this cowardly and shameless dark dragon. He stood there blankly, not knowing what to do. The old priest suddenly walked up to Han Shoror's side at this time and urged Han Shoror anxiously, "Emissary, agree to it, quickly agree to it. As long as he signs a contract with you, he won't be able to disobey your orders." "Lewd dragon, why must you have beauties?" Han Shoror asked amusedly as he stared at Gilbert, whose body was charred and bleeding profusely. He looked like he was about to die at any moment, but he was still calling out for beauties. I don't know either. That's what my father taught me when I was born. Us great dark dragons must have many treasures and many beauties in order to win the respect of other dark dragons. Beauties are what we pursue." Gilbert rubbed his eyes furiously with his jet-black hands as he yelled loudly, "Hey, is this the first time you've left home?" Han Shoror looked at him and asked again, How do you know that this is the first time I've left home?" Gilbert started and looked directly at Han Shoror, asking. This lewd dragon was actually quite dumb. Han Shoror thought silently for a moment without batting an eyelid and called out, "All right, I agree to your request. You must immediately establish a master and servant contract with me, or I'll kill you immediately." Lewd Dragon Gilbert suddenly panicked when these words left his mouth. He opened his mouth and quickly chanted the secret language of the dragon race. A strange power then surged from Gilbert's body into Han Shoror's mind. Han Shoror could feel that he and this lewd dragon seemed to have formed a mysterious connection in that instant. "Master, I'm your servant now. Please help me find beauties." Lewd Dragon Gilbert bared his teeth and cried out loudly, making a request to Han Shoror. "I haven't found any myself, just wait for me," Han Shoror said nonchalantly. Chapter 146. How can you be like this? You can't be like this. Gilbert yelled loudly, his voice rumbling far and wide. All right, we'll talk about this later. Heal your wounds first." Han Shoror casually brushed it off as he inwardly felt the mental fluctuations from just now. After the lewd dragon Gilbert and Han Shoror had formed a contract, a mysterious connection had formed between the two. According to the power of the contract, Han Shoror could sense Gilbert's location even with his eyes closed. In addition, Han Shoror knew that Han Shoror could completely control the life and death of the lewd dragon Gilbert with the power of the contract. Amidst Gilbert's yells, Little Skull appeared in front of Han Shoror with the strange bow in his hand. When the little lewd dragon Gilbert saw Little Skull appear with the bow in his hand, he instinctively felt the aura and abruptly dodged to Han Shoror's side in a panic. Since the bow had appeared, it meant that the dark elf wielding the bow was done for. Taking the bow from Little Skull's hands, Han Shoror held it in his hand and felt it for a bit. He didn't find anything out of the ordinary. After a closer look, he discovered that the entire bow was a dark brown color, like the bark of an old tree. It was full of mysterious, complicated, and strange patterns. Emissary, the matriarch of the Dark Elves, Dana, and a third of the Dark Elves have escaped. The old priest walked to Han Shoror's side and spoke respectfully after hearing the return of the troll leader. Nodding, Han Shoror first put the strange bow into his space ring before saying, "In the underground world, the Dark Elves are very familiar with the surrounding terrain. They are the masters of this place, so it's not strange that they could use the terrain to escape. In order to prevent the Dark Elves from returning for revenge, we need to leave the underground world as soon as possible. Otherwise, if Dana colludes with the other Dark Elf families to attack us, then we'll be in big trouble." "Master, are you returning to the world above ground?" "Oh, that's great. I've never left the underground world before. Now, I can finally see the outside world." When Gilbert heard that Han Shoror and the others were going to return to the surface world, he became very excited and cheered happily. Looking at Gilbert strangely, Han Shoror asked with a frown, "Have you always lived in the underground world?" "Oh, right. How did you become enemies with the Dark Forest?" "Ah, it's nothing much. I snuck out from the Black Dragon City in the underground world. Then, I got lost and kept trying to go up. Then, I met the lizard men. They treated me as an honored guest and promised to bring me out of the underground world. They even promised to find me beautiful women and treasures. Then, I helped them destroy the Dark Elf family's village. However, when I went to destroy the village that the Dark Elves lived in, I discovered that the Dark Elven maidens were very beautiful. It was a pity that the maidens who threw themselves at me immediately turned hostile and started attacking me. I was injured and fled back to the swamp. You know what happened next." Gilbert looked innocently at Han Shoror and began to narrate what had happened. His words were confusing and unclear, leaving many things unsaid. However, Han Shoror could more or less understand Gilbert's meaning and was too lazy to ask for more details. He nodded and instructed, "Are your injuries serious?" "They're serious." The little lewd dragon drooped his head and said dejectedly. He paused and then said, "But I can slowly recover if I have some time to recuperate. The most important thing is that the damage from that strange arrow is a bit hard to bear. I really don't know how such a weak being could shoot such a powerful arrow." With a slap, Han Shoror slapped Gilbert's jet-black head and said, "Idiot, didn't you see that dark elf die immediately after shooting that arrow? It'd be strange if this kind of evil arrow that expends life force wasn't powerful enough. Don't think that you're amazing just because you're big." Crying out in pain, Gilbert rubbed the head that Han Shoror had slapped and complained, "I'm injured now. Even if we're master and servant, you can't mistreat me." After thinking for a moment, Han Shoror took out the Medusa's essence blood and gave it to the little lewd dragon Gilbert. He said, "This is the Medusa's essence blood and has miraculous effects on injuries. It'll definitely be of great benefit to your injuries. Use it sparingly and don't waste it." "Oh, great master, I praise you." Gilbert couldn't see for the time being because his eyes were injured, but when he heard that the Medusa's essence blood could heal injuries, he flattered Han Shoror and waved his hands about, finally obtaining the small bottle that contained the Medusa's essence blood. "Bring my palanquin over to carry this blind dark dragon. We need to leave the underground world as soon as possible. Otherwise, we'll be in great trouble when Dana finds dark elves from other families." Han Shoror looked at the old priest in the distance and gave his orders. The old priest also understood the dangers of the current situation and gave a few instructions to the troll leader in the distance. 2 palanquins were carried over, one comfortably large for the little skull, while the other was a bit more crude for the little lewd dragon Gilbert. Han Shoror led the way on foot at the very front. It was a good thing that Han Shoror had silently memorized the path along the way. With Han Shoror's current memory and mind, he was able to clearly organize such a complicated path in his mind. They didn't run into any difficulties on the way back under Han Shoror's guidance. The old priest was quite surprised when they entered the passageway and began to advance through the complicated and spacious caves. "Emissary, you've only walked the path back once and you've memorized it all?" The old priest finally asked curiously after enduring for a long time. "Oh, This is all under the instructions of the great goddess Dadara. It has nothing to do with me. Han Shor responded carelessly. The little skull poked his head out of the palanquin after an order was given. He waved his little hand at the old priest and saluted Han Shor. The old priest was baffled. He didn't know what the little skull's saluting gesture meant, so he immediately praised the little skull. Halfway through the journey, Han Shor heard many messy footsteps. This made Han Shor's heart skip a beat. He then urged the forest troll to hurry up and leave the underground world as soon as possible. His bright eyes saw a few strange creatures with lizard heads and human bodies at the end of a cave. When he thought of the conversation between the little lewd dragon Gilbert and the dark elves, he immediately understood that these creatures with lizard heads should be the lizard men of the underground world. However, he didn't know why these lizard men would appear here. There are some lizard men here. Do you know what's going on? Han Shor snapped his fingers, and a few forest troll warriors carried the little lewd dragon Gilbert to Han Shor's side. Han Shor then asked Gilbert, who was inside. "Oh, it really is the lizard men. I didn't think that the lizard men would keep their promise. They promised me that they would take me out of the underground world. However, I fell for the dark elves' trick and retreated back to the swamp. I didn't think that they would still be waiting for me." Gilbert cheered and abruptly crawled out of the palanquin. It was unknown if it was due to the effects of the Medusa's essence blood, but Gilbert's bleeding eyes had already returned to normal. Although he was still covered in cuts and bruises and his entire body was black, the blood from his wounds had stopped flowing. The little lewd dragon Gilbert walked out of the palanquin and growled in a deep, thick voice, "Lowly lifeforms, have you come to pay tribute to me?" The lizard men at the end of the cave suddenly cheered when they heard Gilbert's voice. Dozens of lizard men suddenly appeared from the surrounding caves. A few of the lizard men carried a chest of items and respectfully delivered it to Gilbert's feet. An old lizard man supported himself with a walking stick and said shakily, "Mighty Dark Dragon, we've heard that you've helped us punish the evil Dark Elves. We've promised you this chest of treasure, please accept it." Gilbert walked over and reached out to open the chest. He discovered that there were all sorts of beautiful crystals sparkling with multicolored light within the chest. This immediately made Gilbert excited and he opened his mouth again. "Then, where are the beauties you promised me?" The old lizard man snapped his fingers and 3 slender and curvaceous female lizard women walked in front of Gilbert. One of them said shyly in the common language, "Honored Dark Dragon, we 3 sisters will definitely serve you well. Please take us with you." "Ahaha." Han Shor laughed loudly and couldn't help but mock as he looked at the little lewd dragon Gilbert's frozen smile with great interest. "Forget it, I'll accept the crystals. You can take these 3 lizard women away, I don't need them." Gilbert grabbed the chest of crystals and escaped from the 3 lizard women. He immediately urged Han Shor and told Han Shor to leave as soon as possible. When Gilbert approached, Han Shor moved like lightning and snatched the chest of beautiful crystals from Gilbert's grasp. He ignored Gilbert's shouts and threw it into his space ring. He then said, "What's yours is mine. I'll take care of it for you, heh." The group of forest troll then followed the cave they'd entered to the surface world under Han Shor's miraculous memory. Chapter 147. They didn't run into any danger along the way, and Han Shor's party walked out of the underground world safely from the valley they came in from. Although this operation was a little different from the original plan, the final result was still satisfactory. Not only did Han Shor obtain 2 carts of gold and jewels from the Dark Elves, but he also obtained a chest of beautiful crystals, a mysterious bow, and a dark dragon subordinate. Han Shor felt that this trip was very worth it. On the way to the village where the forest troll lived, Dark Dragon Gilbert kept yelling for Han Shor to return the chest of crystals that belonged to him, and for Han Shor to help him find beauties. However, he was heartlessly rejected by Han Shor. In the end, the Dark Dragon knew that he couldn't convince Han Shor, so he stopped wasting his breath and nursed his injuries on his own. Han Shor didn't stay idle either. He took the opportunity to master another intermediate necromancy spell, Dark Mist. This spell could create a mist within a certain range. The caster wouldn't be affected, but the enemy's vision would be blocked. It was a very practical spell for both attack and escape. Han Shoror had more or less mastered the art of the demonic ninth heavens by now. After testing it out, he found that other than some problems with the direction, the other problems were solved through continuous practice. It seemed that it wouldn't be long before Han Shoror could truly fly in the air. When passing by the holy land of the forest troll, Han Shoror had the forest troll wait outside while he and Little Skull went in and stored all the remaining treasures in the holy land into his space ring. This place of extreme wood was still of great use to Han Shoror, so Han Shoror specifically ordered the forest troll guarding the holy land to pay attention to this area. After returning to the village, Han Shoror found traces of an intense battle outside the village. After entering the village and listening to the old priest's narration, Han Shoror learned that the forest trolls had rushed in from all directions after they'd left and fought with the attacking elves. In the end, when the elves saw that the forest trolls were superior in numbers, they retreated dejectedly after losing a few elves. As the god that the forest troll worshipped, Little Skull was worshipped by all the forest troll tribes. Han Shoror ordered the old priest to take away all the luxury items that the McGrady Chamber of Commerce had. He then used the excuse of inspecting the targets to rob and left the forest troll with Little Skull and the lewd dragon Gilbert. After a few days of walking, Han Shoror appeared in the Cemetery of Death. Because of the contract, Han Shoror didn't mind Gilbert and brought him into the cemetery. When Gilbert discovered that Han Shoror actually possessed the Cemetery of Death, a string of flattery poured out of his mouth, praising Han Shoror to the point where he was on cloud 9. "All right, stay in the Cemetery of Death for now to recuperate. I'll come find you directly if I have any orders." Han Shoror didn't care about Gilbert's shouts. After giving him this order, he left the Cemetery of Death through the transportation matrix and returned to the capital of the Empire, Ossen City. As soon as he walked out of the Cemetery of Death, Han Shoror discovered the mark that Emily had left behind. This cave was where Han Shoror entered and exited the Cemetery of Death. It was a place where the transportation matrix was placed. Apart from Han Shoror, only Emily knew about it. From the message that Emily had left behind, Han Shoror knew that Emily had looked for him. She wanted him to go to the Dark Mantle organization and contact Chester as soon as possible after returning from the Cemetery of Death. After putting away the transportation rod that was placed in the transportation matrix, Han Shoror didn't return to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Instead, he headed straight for the Dark Mantle's stronghold. "Oh, you finally appeared. Madam Emily has already looked for you many times. I've also gone to your academy to look for you, but I didn't find any traces of you. Madam Emily told me to stay here and said that you'd contact me. I didn't think that you'd actually appear." The bandit Chester had magically walked out when Han Shoror appeared in the Dark Mantle stronghold. He started yelling loudly when he saw Han Shoror. "Emily is in such a hurry to see me. Has something happened?" Han Shoror asked in astonishment when he saw Chester's anxious appearance. Nodding and then shaking his head, Chester said with a wry face, "Something must have happened, but Madam Emily didn't tell me the specifics." "Then, what did Emily tell you?" Han Shoror knew that there were some things that Emily would only tell him and that Chester had no right to know. Therefore, he asked about Emily's instructions for Chester. "Leave the capital with me immediately. We need to hurry to Valen City. Madam Emily should have already gone there by now," Chester said and then added, "Madam Emily told me to contact her through the organization when I take you to Valen City. She'll explain everything to you in detail then." "Then let's go." Han Shoror nodded in agreement. Valen City was on the western border of the Empire and was separated from the Kossi Empire by the Kurlan Grand Canyon. The Empire's Griffin Legion was stationed there to defend the Kossi Empire. Only when it was time to take action did Han Shoror realize the Dark Mantle's power. Han Shoror and Chester used the Dark Mantle's transportation matrix within the Dark Mantle headquarters and directly descended into Valen City. As soon as the two appeared in Valen City, they contacted the members of the Dark Mantle's stronghold and told them about their mission with Emily. When the member in charge heard that the two were following Emily on a mission, he immediately prepared a carriage and set off for a hotel. Valen City's land was barren and the entire city would be in a hurry every time there was a war with the Kossi Empire. After many years of war, the already poor Valin city became even poorer. Many of the local residents had migrated to other places, and the ones who stayed behind did some military-related business. Han Shoror saw Emily, whom he hadn't seen in a long time, in an extremely large hotel. Emily lived alone in a simple yet elegant room and was furiously scribbling something at this moment. Emily was quite happy when she saw Han Shoror appear, but her expression turned serious when she saw Chester following behind him. She said to Chester, "Chester, wait outside. I have some things to discuss with him." Chester didn't show any displeasure as he respectfully bowed and retreated. He stood outside like a guard, helping Han Shoror and Emily stand guard in case anyone else interrupted their conversation. "I've already given orders to the forest troll. They'll definitely be able to acquire the siege equipment as long as someone goes over to purchase it." Han Shoror walked directly towards Emily after he entered and spoke next to the burning stove. "Our target this time is the Griffin Legion. According to our deductions, the chief of the Griffin Legion has the intention of rebelling. What I need to do is gather evidence." Emily didn't continue to hide anything and immediately revealed their objective this time. Han Shoror was startled, then couldn't help but feel delighted. As the sons of the chief of the Griffin Legion, Claude and Clark had long since formed a deep grudge against him. Claude had died by his hands and Clark had tried to assassinate him not too long ago. It looked like he could take advantage of this mission to get rid of Clark as well. The chief of a legion is rebelling. What's the purpose of this? Although he was overjoyed, Han Shoror didn't forget about proper business and asked in puzzlement. "His Majesty's health is getting worse and worse. The two princes can't be placed in an important position and neither of them can obtain His Majesty's true trust. The chief of the Griffin Legion holds a large number of soldiers. Last time, he had some unknown intentions and begged His Majesty to marry the princess to his son, Clark. His Majesty refused in the end. Afterwards, the Dark Mantle sensed that his actions were a bit suspicious, as if they were connected to the Kossi Empire. Our objective is to gather as much evidence as we can. As long as we have enough evidence, my brother will personally take action and arrest the chief of the Griffin Legion." Emily looked at Han Shoror and explained. "Then, what should we do next?" Emily was most familiar with many of the details. Han Shoror's knowledge of this mission was limited and so he wouldn't rashly express any opinions. He asked Emily honestly, "Since you've already passed on the order to the forest troll, I think that the siege equipment that was stolen from Mediv will appear in Valin City before long. The chief of the Griffin Legion won't make a move in the short term, but according to our Dark Mantle's observations, a storm seems to be brewing in the Empire. The Kossi Empire is eyeing the Empire like a tiger watching its prey and seems to be waiting for His Majesty's death to attack our Empire without restraint. This batch of siege equipment may have been prepared by the chief of the Griffin Legion, Bob Asher, when he plans to attack the palace. As long as we can discover this batch of siege equipment in their house, we can arrest them before they start their rebellion." Emily looked at Han Shoror and explained. "His son, Clark, is currently not in Valin City. I want to kill him first," Han Shoror suddenly said lowly after listening to Emily's explanation. Emily started when she heard these words. She didn't seem to have thought that Han Shoror would know Clark and hold such great hatred for him. Chapter 148. No matter how you incurred his enmity, Clark is an Earthrider, you can't act rashly. Emily couldn't help but remind Han Shoror worriedly when she saw Han Shoror's killing intent. Nodding with a faint smile, Han Shoror comforted Emily, "Don't worry, I'm not a rash person. If I didn't have absolute certainty, I would never make a move against him." Emily finally relaxed after Han Shoror's words and said to Han Shoror, "I'm not too sure if Clark is in Valin City right now. I've heard that he's about to return, but I haven't received any news yet. I'll tell you if Clark really does return to Valin City, but Valin City is the territory of the Griffin Legion, you must be extremely careful." "Understood. What should we do next?" Han Shoror asked Emily. Grabbing a fur coat from a nearby chair and putting it on, Emily stood up and straightened her clothes, saying to Han Shoror, "I'll take you to a place and see if we can gather anything." Emily stood up and looked at herself in the mirror as she straightened her clothes. At this moment, Han Shoror's heart stirred as he recalled some of the jewels he'd obtained from the forest troll Holy Land. He couldn't help but take out a large necklace made of red agate and walked gently behind Emily, helping Emily put it on her fair neck. On her snow-white, beautiful neck, there was an additional ruby necklace that shone with a faint halo. It made Emily's beauty stand out even more, adding a bit of grace and nobility to her temperament. Although Emily's status was noble and she'd seen all kinds of jewels before, the meaning of this red agate necklace was naturally different when Han Shoror gently helped her put it on. Thus, when Han Shoror gently helped her put on the red agate necklace, Emily's eyes sparkled as she looked very happy. "Bad brat, you know how to please people now." Emily smiled and hugged Han Shoror tightly. She took the initiative to give Han Shoror a kiss. Then, she reached out to wipe the kiss mark on Han Shoror's lips and walked out of the room. When she walked out of the room, her expression returned to normal. She instructed Chester, "Go and prepare a carriage. We need to go somewhere." "It is my pleasure to serve you," Chester said respectfully, and walked away dutifully. When Emily and Han Shoror walked out of the inn, Chester's carriage had also been found. Han Shoror and Emily sat inside, while Chester and the coachman sat outside. Under Emily's instructions, they headed south of Valin City. Half an hour later, the carriage stopped in front of a spacious house. There were many luxurious carriages parked in front of the house. There were some valiant swordsmen standing in front of the door, broadswords in hand. All sorts of warriors in metal armor patrolled the house. It looked like the security was very tight. Emily didn't say much, and Han Shoror didn't ask either. When they reached the door, Emily flashed a card and the two guards at the door immediately let them pass. Emily led Han Shoror and Chester into the house. After passing through a cobblestone corridor, the three entered a spacious hall. The interior of the hall was abnormally bright, and there were a dozen or so large furnaces burning in the surroundings, making the entire hall seem very warm. There were many metal cages in the surroundings, with all sorts of male and female slaves within. Some of the male slaves were tall and strong, looking like they were made for hard labor. The female slaves were more beautiful, wearing very little clothing, and their exposed skin was full of temptation. Many well-dressed men and women were pointing at the slaves in the cages in the hall, pulling over smiling slave traders to discuss the price. Many of them were wearing military uniforms, and from the griffin insignia on their shoulders, it was clear that they were members of the Empire's Griffin Legion. This is the largest slave trading house in Valin City, and the master behind the scenes is the Griffin Legion's commander, Bobby Asher. If you look at the guards around you, you'll see that they all have a strict sense of discipline. They're clearly regular soldiers in the army. Although they've taken off their uniforms, it's hard to change their temperament, Emily explained to Han Shoror in a low voice as she pretended to look around. Han Shoror's heart jumped when he heard Emily's words, and he couldn't help but open his mouth in astonishment. The Empire has clear rules that all officials and nobles are not allowed to participate in the slave trade. This Bobby Asher actually dares to do this. In Valin City, Bobby Asher is the local tyrant. Many people know that he's the master behind the scenes of the largest slave trading house. Even His Majesty is aware of this. However, because Bobby Asher has made great contributions to the Empire, His Majesty has turned a blind eye to his actions when he didn't have any intentions of rebelling. But now that some of Bobby Asher's actions have jeopardized the interests of the Empire, we can't sit idly by. As long as we can gather evidence of this largest slave trading house in Valin City, we can also use it as an excuse to arrest Bobby Asher. Emily's eyes darted around as she slowly moved closer to Han Shoror's ear and explained. Chester, who'd come in with the two, was a bit taken aback when he saw that Emily's attitude towards Han Shoror was so intimate. However, as a qualified member of the Dark Mantle, Chester naturally knew that there were some things that he had to pretend he hadn't seen, even if he saw them. Therefore, when Emily noticed his gaze, Chester hastily lowered his head. When he lifted his head again, his expression had returned to normal. However, when he looked at Han Shoror, his gaze revealed surprise, admiration, and even a bit of envy. "The slaves here aren't good enough. I'll take you to see better goods. Maybe you can pick one that you like and take her back as a servant girl or something." When the two guards walked towards Han Shoror and Emily, Emily suddenly raised her voice and reached out to pull Han Shoror, making their way through the hall to another room. When they reached the door, Emily once again flashed the card. The guard at the door checked it and respectfully let them in, saying, "Beautiful madam, I hope you'll be able to obtain a slave that you'll be satisfied with." Giggling delicately, Emily turned around and nodded at Han Shoror, then said with a smile, "Come in." There was a somewhat dim corridor inside. The floor was covered with a soft red carpet, and glass lamps hung high above. There were scrolls of paintings on the walls of the corridor, and there was a guard standing guard every 10 steps. After walking for a minute, the three entered a ring-shaped auction hall. This auction hall was very lavishly decorated, like a movie theater. There were ordinary seats, as well as some small rooms for VIPs. When Emily arrived, she walked into a small room on the left and exchanged a few words with the person inside. She swiped her crystal card and was respectfully led by a guard to the room above. As soon as Han Shoror came in, he heard the clamor of bids. An extremely valiant barbarian was imprisoned in a cage. He let out a beast-like roar, and the people below raised their cards one after another to bid on this valiant barbarian. Some nobles like to fight. They will choose their own gladiators to have a private competition, and the competition will end with the death of one of the gladiators. That's why they come here to choose some powerful slaves, because slaves are the most convenient and worry-free. When Emily brought Han Shoror and Chester to the room above, she calmly explained to Han Shoror. Han Shoror nodded to show that he understood. When he walked into the room, he saw that there was a bidding sign. Han Shoror glanced at it and saw that there was a simple magic device. As long as he moved the magic device, the amount of the bid would be displayed in front of the door of the room. It was very convenient. Some people have noble statuses, or avoid certain things, and don't want others to discover that they are in this place. Therefore, there is a need for these kinds of rooms that can conceal their bodies and see the outside, but those outside cannot see the people inside. When they arrived, Emily's eyes sparkled as she observed the people on the stage and below. She explained to Han Shoror faintly, "I'm sure that the guests of Valin City below will recognize the next person up for auction. She is the young miss of the Addison family of Valin City." The matter of the Addison family colluding with the Kossi Empire was discovered by the wise commander of the Griffin Legion. The Addison family was completely destroyed a few days ago, and all the traitors were executed. The young miss of the Addison family was reduced to a slave. This unruly young miss was once very famous in Valin City. Her breasts are now very full, and she's still a virgin. I'm sure that everyone below will be very interested in this unruly young miss of Valin City. An organizer dressed in formal attire on the stage explained with a smile, arousing the curiosity of those below. He then suddenly raised his arm and shouted, "Miss Lisa of the Addison family. Oh, little Lisa is no longer a young miss, but a female slave that you will take home and indulge in. The starting price is 300 gold coins, begin the auction." A cage was slowly lowered from above as soon as he finished speaking. A teary-eyed Lisa appeared in Han Shoror's field of vision. She wore a sensual muslin dress, and her voluptuous breasts were bulging. Chapter 149. Han Shoror was startled when he saw Lisa appear in the cage, and his originally unintentional gaze became a bit severe. Han Shoror had once harbored hatred towards Lisa, but as the two slowly interacted with each other, Han Shoror discovered that Lisa wasn't that bad after all. She'd even protected him in every way, and this had unwittingly changed Han Shoror's opinion of Lisa. Lisa's eyes were filled with tears as her originally bright eyes were now dim and devoid of light, revealing a kind of helplessness and despair. This made Han Shoror's heart ache greatly. Does the Addison family have some sort of enmity with Bob Asher? Why was the Addison family suddenly destroyed by Bob and accused of treason? Han Shoror's gaze was cold as he looked around and asked Emily. Emily had felt that something was off about Han Shoror when Lisa had first appeared. She couldn't help but ask when she heard Han Shoror's question, "You seem to care a lot about this, Lisa?" Nodding, Han Shoror turned to look at Emily and explained, "Lisa is my classmate in the necromancy major at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. She has a good relationship with me and has helped me many times in the past. Now that Lisa has fallen to such a state, I absolutely can't stand by and watch her die. Emily was startled when she heard Han Shoror's words and then explained to Han Shoror, Lisa is my classmate in the necromancy major at the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. She has a good relationship with me and has helped me many times. Now that Lisa has fallen to such a state, I absolutely can't stand by and watch her die. Emily was startled when she heard Han Shoror's words and then explained to Han Shoror, the Addison family wasn't on good terms with Bob Asher when he didn't have any intentions of rebelling. Because the Addison family still had some status in Vallon City, Bob Asher didn't dare act recklessly. From the information we've received from the Dark Mantle, Bob Asher has been using all sorts of excuses to do so. Little Lisa's figure is impressive, but I have to remind you that she's still a necromancer. You can't take off the anti-massage bracelet she's wearing. The organizer was still describing Lisa's situation. Some of the bidders below showed great interest in Lisa, and the price of the auction soared. From the base price of 300 gold coins, it had already risen to 600 gold coins, a full doubling. When Brian was sold to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force as a slave by his uncle, he was only worth 5 gold coins. Who would have thought that Lisa's price would be so high, more than 100 times higher than Brian's? It seemed that everyone was very interested in the once unruly Lisa. In the beginning, only a few people below participated in the auction, but as time went on, more and more people began to bid. Lisa's bid continued to climb from 600 gold coins to 700 gold coins. Han Shoror observed all of this with a cold eye and suddenly reached out to activate the magical device, calling out a price of 1,000 gold coins. The noisy hall immediately quieted down when the price of 1,000 gold coins appeared in front of Han Shoror's box. Everyone's gazes involuntarily looked at the box that Han Shoror and the others were in with astonishment. It's just a female slave, how can she be worth 1,000 gold coins? People will notice us if you do this. Emily was a bit puzzled as she looked at Han Shoror. I must save this woman. There's no need to dilly-dally and slowly raise the price. A high price will make more people shrink back. Han Shoror looked at the lifeless Lisa in the cage and opened his mouth to speak. As soon as Han Shoror's high bid appeared, the group of bidders who had just been brimming with excitement stopped their bidding in embarrassment. A female slave that could be brought back to play with wouldn't be worth 1,000 gold coins no matter what. Although Lisa's status in Vallon City had once been noble and was a bit tempting to them, 1,000 gold coins wasn't a small sum after all. Disregarding Lisa's status, a slave of the same beauty would only be worth 50 gold coins at most. Therefore, when Han Shoror called out the high price of 1,000 gold coins, the organizer called out 3 times and very straightforwardly called out, congratulations, bidder number 83. You only need to swipe your crystal card in the box and transfer 1,000 gold coins to our slave shop. Little Lisa is yours. To the current Han Shoror, 1,000 gold coins wasn't a large sum at all. Han Shoror's spoils of war were worth tens of thousands of gold coins in his recent trip to the Dark Forest. Therefore, Han Shoror didn't even crease his brow at the price of 1,000 gold coins. He directly took out his crystal card and planned on swiping it in the notch in the box. Suddenly stopping Han Shoror, Emily moved Han Shoror's hand to the side and said, "Let me do it. If you use your crystal card, it'll leave the name on your crystal card account in the slave shop. Although the slave shop will keep this a secret, Bob Asher can easily find out your account name if he wants to investigate you." Han Shoror thought for a bit after Emily's words and felt that it made sense. He opened his mouth and said, "All right, I'll transfer 1,000 gold coins to your crystal card number and then you can use a secure crystal card to pay for it." To Emily, she hadn't planned on letting Han Shoror do this. 1,000 gold coins wasn't much to Emily. But when Emily was about to help Han Shoror pay, she noticed Chester's gaze on the side. Her thoughts spun slightly and Emily still nodded and agreed to Han Shoror's suggestion. She transferred 1,000 gold coins from Han Shoror's crystal card to another crystal card she'd prepared and then paid for Lisa. A few elven slaves, 2 orc fox girls, and a very strong berserker were auctioned off later on. Hanshaw's group didn't continue to make a move and observed everything with cold eyes. We can come in late at night next time to investigate. Since you're participating in the auction today, let's not walk around randomly. Emily explained the layout of the entire slave shop to Hanshaw in detail as the auction continued, including some things that should be taken note of. She only said this to Hanshaw in the end. Nodding in agreement, Hanshaw, Emily, and Chester walked out of the box and were about to take Lisa away when the sharp-eyed Hanshaw saw someone suddenly enter the door. He suddenly stopped and gestured towards Emily, saying in a low voice, "You and Chester, go get Lisa first. I have some matters to attend to." Hanshaw's body moved quickly after he'd finished speaking and made his way through the crowd with large strides. He abruptly appeared in front of the door and approached Lawrence, who'd just appeared. However, before Hanshaw could approach Lawrence, two people suddenly appeared next to Lawrence. The two took a step forward, one on the left and one on the right, looking warily at Hanshaw. Lawrence finally noticed Hanshaw at this time. He first looked at Hanshaw with surprise and then turned back to call out to the two, beckoning to Hanshaw. When Hanshaw appeared in front of Lawrence, Lawrence asked Hanshaw with great surprise, "Brian, what are you doing in Valin City?" "I have some matters to attend to." "Right, what are you doing here?" Hanshaw asked. His face abruptly froze. Lawrence said in a cold voice, "Something happened to my cousin's family. Even Lisa has been framed and reduced to a slave. I heard that she's going to be auctioned off here, so I've come to save my cousin." Lisa was related to the Lawrence family, so it looked like Lawrence must have known about the Addison family's matters. That's why he'd come all the way here from the capital. This made Hanshaw's opinion of Lawrence rise a notch. He hadn't thought that this person would place so much importance on family. According to the ways of the world, there was a limit to how close a cousin's relationship could be. Bob Asher had accused the Odysseus family of treason. Such a serious crime would cause all the relatives to shrink back, because one wrong move could bring trouble upon themselves. Hanshaw already had a whole new level of respect for Lawrence that he'd come all the way here from 1,000 miles away. Lawrence's sincerity had already made Hanshaw look at him in a new light. "You're a step too late. Lisa has already been auctioned off for 1,000 gold coins." Hanshaw looked at Lawrence and smiled faintly. "It must be that old dog Calvert. Lisa's family has never been on good terms with his family, and he was the one who started the matter with Lisa's family this time. He'll definitely be willing to spend a great deal of money to buy Lisa back and torture her." Lawrence's face was cold as he suddenly spoke to the two behind him. "It looks like we're going to be robbers who commit murder and arson today." The two behind Lawrence were expressionless and wore very ordinary, loose clothes. It was impossible to make out anything from their attire, and only when Hanshaw calmed his senses did he discover that one was a swordsman and the other a mage. However, Hanshaw couldn't sense their exact strength. "How could I let Lisa be auctioned off by someone else since I'm here?" "Don't worry, Lisa is in my hands." Hanshaw had already determined from Lawrence's face that Lawrence was truly concerned about Lisa, so he spoke with a slight smile. Lawrence heaved a sigh of relief when he heard these words and then said sincerely to Hanshaw, "Brian, I owe you a favor." Chapter 150. You don't owe me anything. Lisa and I can be considered friends in the academy. This is what I should do. As Hanshaw spoke, he saw Emily and Chester walking out with Lisa, who was wrapped in a black robe. "Let's leave this place first." Lawrence followed Hanshaw's gaze and noticed Emily and Chester's movements. His eyes suddenly lit up as he spoke softly and turned to leave. There were some procedures to enter the slave trading house, but they weren't so strict when leaving. Hanshaw and Lawrence didn't encounter any obstructions behind Emily and Chester as they left. Emily was escorted by two guards from the slave trading house. When they arrived at the door, Emily waved her hand and the two respectfully retreated. When they arrived at the side of the carriage, Emily was a bit surprised to see Lawrence appear. Hanshaw's expression was relatively calm as he said to Lawrence, "I met Madam Emily when I was at your house last time. I've come to Valin City this time under Madam Emily's orders to do some things for her." Lawrence obviously knew some things, but didn't say anything. He smiled amiably at Han Shoror. These are your matters, you don't need to tell me anything. I think we should first take a look at my cousin. Lifting the curtains of the carriage, Han Shoror and Lawrence walked in. The two had just entered when a teary-eyed Lisa threw herself into Han Shoror's arms and sobbed, "Brian, they killed my entire family. My father, mother, and grandfather were all killed." Lisa was heartbreakingly weak at this moment. Han Shoror patted Lisa's shoulder lightly and said in a low voice, "You're safe now, those people will be punished." Hugging Han Shoror tightly, Lisa seemed to use all of her strength, but also to prove the reality of this moment. She bit down on her pinky finger and cried out in pain, "I'm not dreaming, I'm still alive, I want revenge, I want to kill those cruel people." Lisa, who had always been unruly and fierce in the academy, had suddenly changed after experiencing the tragedy of her life. The naivety on her face was replaced by hatred, as if revenge was the courage to continue living in this moment. "Lisa, what happened? Tell me in detail, I'll take revenge for you." Lawrence's eyes blossomed with a frosty light as he looked at the crying Lisa and asked in a low voice. It was only at this moment that Lisa seemed to notice that there was another person in the carriage apart from Han Shoror. Lisa wiped away the tears in her eyes, and when she opened her eyes and saw Lawrence, she once again sobbed bitterly. "Brother Lawrence, I'm not too sure what happened, but father said that my mother was sick and told me to go home and visit her. When I returned to Valen City, father told me that there might be danger at home. Mother wasn't sick, but he didn't let me go home either." Then the next day, Calvert, that lackey of the Griffin Legion, rushed into our home with his men and started killing and capturing people everywhere. Apart from me, everyone else died, all of them were killed, woo. "Don't worry, I'll take revenge for you," Lawrence promised Lisa with a cold expression. "Help me kill Calvert, you have to help me kill him." Lisa cried out helplessly. She first looked at Lawrence, and then stared at Han Shoror with a mournful gaze. A complete family, all of her relatives killed in an instant. This was too much of a shock for Lisa, and it made the usually unruly Lisa reveal a pitiful, weak, and helpless appearance. "I'll help you." Lisa's gaze made Han Shoror silent for a while, and then he nodded in agreement. "If you want to kill Calvert, we need to discuss this properly." Emily suddenly called out in a low voice from outside the carriage, and then stuck her head out to look at Han Shoror and Lawrence, saying, "At the very least, we need to leave this place first. Lisa, come with me." Lawrence climbed out of the carriage and nodded at the two people standing indifferently on the side. The swordsman of the two left and soon brought over another carriage. Lawrence dragged Lisa inside, and the coachman swung the reins, and the carriage slowly started moving. "Follow him," Han Shoror instructed Chester outside, and then turned to look apologetically at Emily, saying, "Perhaps it's a bit different from your plan, but I have to do this. I understand you, and killing Calvert was our original goal as well. This isn't much different from our plan. We've got some extra help, haven't we?" Emily smiled in understanding and then said with a bit of seriousness, "This Lawrence seems to be the son of the Empire's finance minister. However, the strength of the two behind him isn't bad. In addition, Lawrence's behavior seems to be a bit strange. How do you know this person? Do you know his background?" Shaking his head, Han Shoror hesitated for a moment before replying, "Lord Candide told me that Lawrence's identity wasn't simple. He said that if I got too close to him, I might get into trouble. However, I've been in contact with Lawrence for a while and feel that this person should be quite reliable. If that old fox Candide knows Lawrence's identity, but didn't tell you, then this means that Lawrence's identity is definitely not that simple. It looks like I'll have to ask my brother." Emily frowned and spoke with some confusion. Suddenly, at a corner, Lawrence's carriage stopped. Lawrence poked his head out and waited until Han Shoror and Emily's carriage was next to his. He spoke, "Brian, I think this matter isn't directly related to Madame Emily. If you have her best interests at heart, it's best that you don't involve her in this." Han Shoror started and exchanged a look with Emily in the carriage. Emily frowned and thought for a while before speaking to Han Shoror, "Go with them and see what they're up to. Come find me at the Dark Mantle Stronghold when you come back." I'll go back and investigate Lawrence's background. Nodding at Emily, Hanshaw walked out of Emily's carriage and walked towards Lawrence's carriage. He said with a smile, "You're so thoughtful. Madam Emily really doesn't need to involve herself in this." "I'm very sorry, Madam Emily, but you know that I'm doing this for your own good. ASCII fears no one in Valin City. Even with your status, there are some things that you can't interfere with." Lawrence called out softly to the carriage that Emily was in and then instructed the people in front, "Let's go." After Hanshaw entered, Lisa seemed to have stabilized her emotions after Lawrence's persuasion. Lawrence didn't say much when Lisa was in the carriage, his expression dark and his thoughts unknown. At this moment, Hanshaw didn't know what to say to Lisa either and was also silent the entire way. The carriage stopped in front of a house and Lawrence said softly to Lisa, "Get off the carriage and stay in that house. Brian and I are going out to take care of some matters and we'll be back soon. Don't worry, you'll be very safe in that house." Lisa was much more obedient than usual after experiencing such a tragic disaster. She nodded obediently and allowed Lawrence to get off the carriage. Lawrence knocked on the door and a person walked out. This person was hidden in the shadows and Hanshaw immediately discovered that he was the expert that had spied on Clark. "Send her in and have the people inside protect her. You're coming with me," Lawrence instructed and returned to the carriage. After Lisa had gone in, the person walked out and entered the carriage after a while. He sat down silently in front of Hanshaw and Lawrence, not saying a word. When they met face to face, Hanshaw took a closer look and found that this person looked very ordinary. Hanshaw didn't find anything special about his face. However, this person was able to follow the Earth Rider Clark without being discovered. This was enough to show that his strength wasn't ordinary. He's called Lucky and is an assassin. The two people outside with the coachman are the senior swordsman Devac and the Earth Adept Major Dello. "We're going to kill Calvert now," Lawrence introduced them to Hanshaw and then said that they were going to kill Calvert. "What's your plan?" Hanshaw was silent for a moment and then asked. "Calvert is the loyal lackey of the Griffin Legion's leader, Bob Asher, and is in charge of food distribution in Valin City. He was originally an officer of the Griffin Legion and was originally an senior knight of 43 years old. He only had one son, Calvert, who once tried to rape Lisa. In the end, his manhood was cut off by Lisa instead. Thus, the two families formed a deep enmity that is difficult to resolve. As an senior knight, Calvert has more than 10 servants in his house, most of which are soldiers of the Griffin Legion. He's not too hard to deal with. Lawrence slowly said these words, proving that he must have done a detailed investigation beforehand. "I've just received news that Clark has already returned to Valin City and seems to have arrived at Calvert's house. He seems to be helping his father pass on some instructions to Calvert." At this moment, the silent assassin Lucky suddenly spoke up. Startled, Lawrence's brows furrowed tightly and he seemed to be hesitant. Hanshaw's heart also jolted as a thick murderous intent appeared on his face. Lawrence's hesitant appearance meant that he was no longer confident because of Clark's appearance. Hanshaw, who had entered the true demon realm, Little Skull, and necromancy magic, dared to face Clark head-on. However, Hanshaw also wasn't confident that he could win against the Earth Rider Clark, so he also remained silent. "Uncle Lucky, if you were to assassinate Clark, how confident are you in killing him?" After a moment of silence, Lawrence opened his mouth to ask Assassin Lucky. "I think only 50%. Lucky replied indifferently. Nodding, Lawrence said, "All right, then you'll be the first to assassinate Clark. I believe that with your strength, even if you can't succeed, you'll be able to retreat unscathed. When the time comes, we'll decide if we need to act together based on Clark's physical condition. If I want to leave, Clark definitely won't be able to find me." Lucky responded. "I think that if Mr. Lucky and I work together, we can at least increase our chances of success by 30%. Hanshaw looked at Lucky and suddenly spoke. "Brian, are you sure that you won't be discovered and won't affect Uncle Lucky?" Lawrence's expression turned serious as he looked gravely at Hanshaw. "I think that my participation will be of help to him. If you trust me, I want to act together with him." Han Shaw also spoke seriously as he looked at Lawrence. All right, Uncle Lucky, take him and give it a try. If it doesn't work, give up midway and we'll find another time to act. Lawrence thought for a bit and said to Assassin Lucky. All right. Lucky responded and glanced at Han Shaw, saying, we'll leave from here. If the Calvert residence is on fire, that means we can act. You can directly kill your way in, otherwise don't approach. Don't worry, I know what to do. You guys be careful. Lawrence nodded in agreement. Let's go. Lucky glanced at Han Shaw and his body lightly floated down from the carriage. He leapt onto a 3-meter-tall roof without making a sound. Han Shaw took a deep breath and circulated his magical yuan after focusing his attention. He used the art of the demonic ninth heavens and also leapt into the air. His body flew up a bit higher than Lucky's jump and also landed soundlessly next to Lucky. Hey! Lucky turned back to look at Han Shaw in astonishment. The lips on his apathetic face twitched slightly as he said faintly, not bad, perhaps you really can help me a bit. The old assassin Lucky didn't continue to look at Han Shaw after he'd finished speaking. His body nimbly shuttled through the night streets and rooftops, drifting like a wandering ghost. Han Shaw greatly admired the agility of this person's body. However, Han Shaw's magical yuan had reached the true demon realm. His body's agility and flexibility were also outstanding. Using his extraordinary senses, Han Shaw followed closely behind Lucky and didn't fall behind at all. Chapter 151. I've troubled the chief. Heh, it's getting late. Why don't you rest here tonight? I've prepared a special program for you. Calvert chuckled. Another chant rang out as bone arrows filled the air, surging into the midst of the officers and causing them to cry out in pain. Suddenly, numerous skeletal, zombie, and ghouls appeared in the blink of an eye, as well as the howling gargoyles and hate warriors, charging towards the officers. Hide in a tree and wait. When I make the first move, seize the opportunity and attack Clark. Lucky instructed as he crouched on a wall on the side of the street like a gecko, matching the color of the night. Since Clark was about to leave, Warren changed his strategy and decided to make his move on the road. They would definitely pass through a street after leaving Calvert's house. There were all sorts of buildings and a few lush trees around the street. It was a good place to make a move. Although Han Shaw hadn't fully mastered the art of the demonic ninth heavens yet, simple flight wasn't a problem. It was because of this art that Han Shaw was able to grow wings and fly out of the encirclement of the soldiers. Suddenly, a series of crackling sounds rang out from the bottom of the carriage. The carriage split into pieces in an instant, wood splinters mixed with sand flying everywhere. The milky white sword light burst out 2 meters and blossomed from the broken carriage. The bursting sword light was like a hedgehog covered with spikes, and Lucky was like a hedgehog wrapped in the sword light. No, thank you, Uncle, but there have been a few more strangers in Valen City recently. I have many things to do and won't be staying today. Clark stood up and seemed to want to leave. Uncle Calvert, Lawrence's identity isn't that simple. You must be on your guard. My father will send someone to protect you in secret in 2 days. Clark warned Calvert. Oh, my gosh, it's actually an archmage necromancer. Calvert suddenly cried out in surprise and yelled out loudly. Han Shaw nodded and didn't say anything else. He leapt into the air and landed on a roof. When he looked down, he discovered that Lucky had miraculously disappeared without a trace. Han Shaw stood up and shot a look at Lucky when his ears left the tiles. The two of them left without a sound and quickly moved outwards. There were many houses in the surroundings, but when Han Shaw listened attentively, he discovered that there didn't seem to be anyone living in the houses. He didn't know if they'd been arranged to leave beforehand. Han Shaw was a bit regretful that he hadn't used his senses to scout the surroundings beforehand. He'd been too focused on killing Clark and hadn't paid attention to some details. After advancing to the true demon realm, Han Shaw did indeed feel that his body was more flexible and useful than before. He could change his body into various states through his own adjustments. For example, It was very easy for him to conceal his presence like this. After a while, a carriage drove out from the direction of Calvert's house. The clattering of the carriage was quite ear-piercing in the silent night. The coachman was a sturdy guard. He waved the reins in his hand and spurred the running horses. When the carriage arrived at Lage's hiding place, a figure darted out from a hidden corner like lightning. It was as if he was weightless and stuck to the bottom of the carriage. Lucky's performance in this regard was quite satisfactory. He first crouched on the roof as soon as he entered Calvert's house and took a look at the layout of the entire building. He then pointed out the general purpose of each room to Han Shoror, such as where the living room was, the master bedroom, and even the bathroom. He vaguely pointed them out to Han Shoror. Just as Han Shoror was worrying for Lucky, a figure used a levitation spell and quickly approached from the distance. The moon was covered by a cloud of black mist in the blink of an eye, and the already dim sky darkened in an instant. The figure extended a white bone staff from his wide sleeves as he approached. He waved his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. Taking a deep breath, Han Shoror stood in the distance and looked around. He discovered that there were close to 100 soldiers at Clark's place. These well-trained people were searching for Lucky from room to room. They gave up on the chase after Han Shoror and focused all their attention on Lucky. Han Shoror was startled as he looked at the necromancer that had appeared in the sky. He was stunned by this powerful necromancy magic. "We've been tricked, retreat immediately." Han Shoror suddenly called out lowly from the tree above and quickly jumped down from the lush foliage. At this moment, Han Shoror's heart was actually calmer. He looked around coldly and discovered that there were suddenly a few more soldiers on the streets. These people were riding war horses and whizzing in his direction. There were even some who had drawn their longbows and were shooting at him from the roof. From the direction of Calvert's house, a calm and unruffled Clark walked out with a broad, middle-aged knight. Their gazes were fixed on Han Shoror as they spurred their war horses to charge over. Because Clark might be in the hall, the two didn't dare act rashly. They lifted the roof tiles to observe and stuck their cheeks to the roof, trying to hear what was being said inside. In addition, Han Shoror discovered that the art of the demonic ninth heavens was much more skillful than the levitation spells that mags in this world could use when they reached the Archmage realm. When an Archmage cast the levitation spells, they couldn't compare to the agility and speed of Han Shoror's art of the demonic ninth heavens. Lucky changed into a grayish-brown robe. The color of his robe was the same as the color of the walls of the building. When he slowly walked along the wall, no one would be able to detect anything out of the ordinary even under the bright moonlight. It looked like Lucky had a very detailed understanding of the various styles of buildings. He must have spent a great deal of time and effort studying them. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to obtain so much information just by looking at the layout of the building. Han Shoror nimbly dodged the arrows when they came, and then discovered that even more soldiers were approaching. After thinking for a bit, Han Shoror deployed the art of the demonic ninth heavens and his entire body suddenly flew into the air, shooting out like a hawk. All of this was clearly seen by Han Shoror from afar. When he saw the carriage quickly approach the large tree he was on, Han Shoror took a deep breath and focused his cold eyes, tightening his grip on the Demon Slayer edge. Lucky's expression was still calm as he looked around and said softly, "Let's split up and escape. We'll pass through the houses nearby." There was no way for Lucky to warn Han Shoror about the timing of his attack in advance. There was no way to teach Han Shoror the timing of his attack in the blink of an eye. Lucky could only let Han Shoror grasp it himself. Under Lucky's gaze, Han Shoror also took out a robe of similar color and put it on. He followed behind Lucky and approached the brightly lit roof of the hall. In the beginning, Han Shoror was quite surprised, thinking that Lucky had succeeded so quickly. When Han Shoror focused his attention on the corpse, he discovered that the person was completely unfamiliar and wasn't Clark at all. Messy footsteps quickly approached from all directions, immediately making Han Shoror realize the severity of the situation. As they slowly approached the hall, Han Shoror's breathing became long and steady, and his heartbeat suddenly slowed to match his breathing. Even the heat emanating from his body changed as he approached the roof of the hall. When they were about to reach the roof, if Han Shoror's entire body wasn't moving, he would have been mistaken for a tile on the roof. When the two flew to Calvert's house, Hanshaw finally recognized the old assassin Lucky's expertise. A qualified assassin would always maintain a low profile before making a move to assassinate the target. Only at the moment of making a move could the other party sense his presence. Let's do this. Be careful for now, Lawrence seems to have appeared in Valin City. He may come looking for trouble with you. Clark's voice sounded, reminding Calvert to be careful. Lawrence is only the son of the Empire's finance minister. Isn't he just throwing his life away by coming to Valin City to deal with me? Calvert didn't mind as he laughed loudly like a great bell. Lucky had taken a pill, but his body still couldn't reach the level of stealth that Hanshaw had. When they finally reached the roof, Lucky looked incredulously at Hanshaw, very surprised at Hanshaw's extraordinary control over his body. It was only now that Hanshaw discovered that Lucky was also an assassin with the strength of a swordmaster. A milky white light flashed through the air, disappearing in the blink of an eye as if it had never appeared. An intact carriage was instantly smashed into pieces, and the person inside died on the spot with bloody holes all over his body. The coachman in the front ran for his life. Numerous arrows whistled through the air, but Hanshaw used the Demon Slayer edge to break through them. He'd flown out of the encirclement in the blink of an eye and landed on a large tree in the distance. Chapter 152. Necromancers were rare to begin with, and Archmage-level necromancers were even rarer. Therefore, the appearance of this necromancer immediately caused many gasps of surprise. Hanshaw had just used the art of the demonic ninth heavens to escape from that area when he suddenly discovered this change. He hesitated for a moment and weaved through the surrounding rooftops, retreating back the way he'd come. When this necromancer had appeared, he'd used necromancy summoning to summon many dark creatures from another dimension. The appearance of these dark creatures greatly affected the soldiers chasing after Lucky, especially the enormous hate warriors and the group of gargoyles flying through the air. The enormous and shockingly strong hate warriors could smash a soldier into meat paste with a swing of an enormous metal rod. The agile gargoyles' metal claws whistled through the air and were also a great threat. "Damn it, I'll go kill him," Clark roared angrily as he whipped the reins and the warhorse beneath him charged forward. A long spear appeared in his hand as he charged in the direction of the necromancer. Under the ferocious gallop of the warhorse and the charge of the shining spear, the skeletal and zombie warriors in the way were unable to obstruct him at all. Knights could increase their own strength by a level with the charging force of their warhorse. Therefore, the scattered dark creatures were unable to stop Clark at all when he and his warhorse charged forward as one. At this time, because the Archmage-level necromancer had appeared, the surrounding soldiers were busy dealing with the summoned creatures and were unable to provide any effective assistance to Clark. Adept Knight Calvert remained where he was, directing the movements of the soldiers. When these well-trained soldiers had calmed down and formed teams to deal with the dark creatures, the rows of skeletal and zombie warriors were the first to fall. Although this Archmage-level necromancer had enormous mental strength, the number of dark creatures he could summon couldn't compare to the number of soldiers here. In particular, some of the ghouls and skeletal warriors were of limited use and were often destroyed by a single thrust from the Griffin Legion soldiers. However, the enormous hate warriors and the gargoyles howling in the darkness were still quite ferocious. They'd killed quite a few soldiers in a short while. It was a pity that there were only 5 hate warriors and 6 or 7 gargoyles. Under the volley of arrows from the archers, a few gargoyles were hit. Then, each hate warrior was surrounded by 10 or so Griffin Legion soldiers. A low groan sounded from the necromancer's mouth as 2 of the fallen hate warriors suddenly exploded. The appearance of the 2 corpse explosion spells instantly caused a dozen or so Griffin Legion soldiers to die with ghastly screams. By the time the necromancer was about to continue chanting another spell, Clark had already rushed in front of him on his warhorse. The silver spear in his hand suddenly lit up with a milky white sword light. Using the momentum of his warhorse, Clark flew up with his spear, stabbing towards the necromancer who was floating in the air with the levitation spell like lightning. Enormous white bones suddenly appeared in midair and formed a white bone shield with miraculous speed. The white bone shield was 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, completely blocking the necromancer within. The white bones sparkled with a wondrous light and didn't leave the slightest gap when assembled. Some of the sharp bone fragments formed barbs in front of the shield, looking quite peculiar. With a crack, Clark's attack, infused with his ferocious momentum, suddenly smashed onto the white bone shield. Even such a high-level white bone shield was accompanied by cracking sounds as it shattered under Clark's wave of violent attacks. Bone powder flew everywhere where the spear pierced through the smooth and large white bones. With a muffled groan, the necromancer drifted back like a ghost. It looked like he'd realized that Clark wasn't easy to deal with and planned on putting some distance between them first. Clark's body landed on a roof after his charge ended. He sheathed his spear and swapped it for a long sword. He quickly weaved through the roofs and fixed his eyes on the necromancer as he chased after him. Another dark mist was released and the body of the necromancer who'd just retreated flashed through the mist, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. 3 bone spears pierced through the air at the same time, aiming straight for Clark. Clark was finally able to determine the necromancer's location after the 3 bone spears appeared. At the same time, the sharp-eyed Han Shoror saw a protruding stone-like object move slightly on the roof Clark was on. This made Han Shoror's heart skip a beat as his body abruptly stopped and he hid on another roof. However, the Demon Slayer Edge had already silently approached Clark according to his thoughts. Snorting coldly, Clark didn't stop his charge, but suddenly changed directions midway. The long sword in his hand suddenly flickered and broke the bone spear that he hadn't been able to dodge. At this moment, Clark's figure finally neared the protruding stone-like object. The originally motionless object suddenly shot out a ray of cold light, and then Lucky's body, which was covered by a grayish-brown robe, appeared at the same time. Clark hadn't anticipated such a sudden attack when he'd just broken through the necromancer's bone spear. He'd only gathered half of his fighting aura when he immediately raised his sword to block the attack. The sound of metal clashing resounded through the night sky as Clark's body was involuntarily flung down from the roof. In the middle of Clark's descent, a sharp whistle suddenly sounded. A thin and long purple flame appeared out of thin air and bombarded Clark's lower back. The purple flame entered Clark's lower back and disappeared into his body in an instant. A ghastly howl suddenly sounded from Clark's mouth. When Clark's body landed on the ground, his entire body suddenly ignited with purple flames. Han Shoror's figure bizarrely flew in front of Clark and looked coldly at Clark, who was being burned by the purple flames. With a mental summon, the Demon Slayer Edge broke out of Clark's chest and landed in Han Shoror's palm without a single drop of blood. It's you? Clark, whose internal organs had all been invaded by the cold and his body had also been rapidly damaged by the Demon Slayer Edge, spat out these words with difficulty when he saw Han Shoror reveal himself and pull off his mask. His teeth chattered and his face was full of disbelief. That's right, it's me. You've tried to kill me twice and failed, but I only need one chance to kill you. Han Shoror said callously as he waved his right hand and circulated the mystical glacial spellfire. A red flame landed on Clark's body. Clark, who had already been invaded by the cold and was about to die, was burned again by the spellfire and turned into a puddle of blood in an instant. The speed of the spellfire was unbelievable. 3 bone spears appeared out of thin air and aimed straight at Han Shoror. The whistling sound startled Han Shoror. He leapt up and slashed with the Demon Slayer Edge in his hand, cutting a bone spear in half. Han Shoror yelled at Lucky in the distance, "Damn it, why is he attacking me as well? I don't know him." Lucky replied as he dodged the attack with lightning speed. This was because the necromancer had also attacked Lucky. So it wasn't one of his own. Han Shoror was startled and abruptly dodged. When the necromancer saw Han Shoror escape, he actually began to tangle with Han Shoror and relentlessly chased after Han Shoror. This necromancer's appearance was a bit strange, and he wasn't on Lawrence's side. This made Han Shoror feel quite puzzled and he didn't know which side the necromancer belonged to. Now that Clark was dead, Han Shoror saw that Lucky had concealed his figure and was heading in Calvert's direction. It looked like he was planning on finishing off Calvert as well. Han Shoror didn't know anything about his counterpart and didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw that his counterpart had set his sights on him. He didn't plan on tangling with the necromancer any longer and fled outside as fast as he could. When Hanshaw was a few hundred meters away from Calvert's house, Hanshaw discovered Lawrence's carriage with his astonishing eyesight. Hanshaw was overjoyed and quickly made his way to Lawrence's carriage. The necromancer's counterpart that was chasing Hanshaw summoned a few gargoyles to follow Hanshaw. Only when Hanshaw appeared next to Lawrence's carriage did the necromancer and the gargoyles suddenly retreat. "Brian, what's going on? Why didn't you send out any signals? But it's a mess over there again." Lawrence immediately poked his head out of the carriage when he saw Hanshaw appear and asked anxiously to Hanshaw, "Don't mention it, tonight's events are a bit strange. Lucky and I don't know what's going on. We were mysteriously discovered and were almost caught by Clark. Then, an archmage necromancer suddenly appeared and attacked Clark and the others after he appeared. In the end, he attacked us as well. I really don't know what's going on," Hanshaw complained. "Then how's Uncle Lucky? Is Clark dead?" Lawrence asked again. Mr. Lucky snuck towards Calvert and seemed to be planning on finishing him off. Clark's done for, you don't have to worry," Hanshaw responded. Lawrence couldn't disguise the ecstasy on his face as he laughed heartily. Well done, well done. Valin City is about to descend into chaos." Chapter 153. Lawrence had a crazed expression on his face as he spoke, as if he wished for the world to be in chaos. This made Hanshaw feel quite astonished. "Brian, I'll be staying in Valin City for now. You can find me in the house you just came from if you need anything." Right, how do I contact you?" Lawrence was in a good mood as he turned his head to look at Hanshaw. Musing for a moment, Hanshaw gave Lawrence the address of the hotel Emily was staying in and then quickly left, not caring about what happened afterwards. The hotel Emily was staying in wasn't a Dark Mantle stronghold, so Hanshaw wasn't afraid that Lawrence would find her. As Hanshaw was making his way back to the Dark Mantle stronghold, the sound of iron hooves rang out from Calvert's direction. It looked like Clark's death had indeed greatly affected the entirety of Valin City. Hanshaw didn't linger in this direction at this moment, nor did he care about whether Calvert had been assassinated by Lucky. He concealed his tracks and quickly made his way back to the Dark Mantle stronghold. Hanshaw easily found Emily after arriving at the Dark Mantle stronghold in Valin City. Waving her hands, Emily had Chester withdraw and then said to Hanshaw with a grave expression, "I know Lawrence's identity. She was indeed worthy of being a senior executive of the Dark Mantle." Hanshaw looked joyfully at Emily and asked in high spirits, "That's great. Just what is that kid's background? His status seems to be quite high. Oh, if you interact with him in the future, pay attention to what you say and how you address him. This person may have a great influence on you." Emily glared unhappily at Hanshaw and then chanted a dark magic spell in a low voice. A boundary suddenly formed in the room and enveloped Hanshaw and Emily within. With this boundary, the members outside won't be able to hear what I'm going to say next," Emily said gravely. Hanshaw was quite surprised to see Emily act so cautiously and hurriedly asked, "All right, don't keep me in suspense. Just what is Lawrence's identity?" Taking a deep breath, Emily sighed and said in a low voice, "He should be His Royal Highness the Third Prince." Startled, Hanshaw looked at Emily with a bit of disbelief. He then shook his head and said with a smile, "You're not joking, are you? Every citizen of the Lancelot Empire knows very well that His Majesty only has 2 sons. How could there be a third prince? In addition, everyone knows that Lawrence is the son of the finance minister of the Empire. How could he be the third prince? I'm telling the truth." Emily couldn't help but reach out and pinch Hanshaw when she saw that Hanshaw didn't quite believe her. She then explained, "This matter is a scandal in the royal family. The finance minister, Evive, has some problems in that area and has married a beautiful wife, Alice. He can only look at her and not touch her. Evive has a very good relationship with His Majesty and met Evive's wife, Alice, at a private banquet that Evive held. His Majesty was awed by Alice's beauty, and because Evive was impotent and His Majesty deliberately took action, the two ended up together. This matter was discovered by Evive because Alice was pregnant. Afterwards, His Majesty personally showed up and explained the matter to Yviv. What was done could not be undone. Add to that the fact that His Majesty was the ruler of the nation. Yviv knew that he was impotent and couldn't say anything to Alice, so he tacitly agreed to the matter. However, because the impact of this matter was too bad, it had been concealed by both sides. Some of the nobles in the upper echelons of the empire were aware of it, but no one dared to talk about it. Lawrence was the son of His Majesty and Alice. Ever since Lawrence was born, his ambitious mother, Alice, had carefully raised him, making him study the ways of governing the country and teaching him the knowledge he needed to know. Lawrence had known his identity since he was young, but his talents were extraordinary and his conduct was brilliant. He even had a very good relationship with his adoptive father, Yviv. It was a pity that because of his identity as an illegitimate child, Lawrence couldn't enter the royal family. This made His Majesty feel very guilty and doted on Lawrence. He would often meet with Lawrence alone to express his concern. It was said that His Majesty was very satisfied with Lawrence. As for the other two princes, one was brave and had the potential to become a great general, while the other was extraordinarily intelligent but indecisive. It seemed that neither of them were suitable candidates to manage the affairs of the country. Because His Majesty's body was growing weaker and weaker, and he himself felt that he didn't have much time left, His Majesty had been the closest to Lawrence during this period of time. According to the outside rumors, His Majesty had the intention of revealing Lawrence's identity and supporting Lawrence to become the next king. However, the other two princes' mother's side was extremely powerful within the empire. If His Majesty acted rashly, even he wouldn't be able to grasp the situation. That was why he hadn't acted yet. As His Majesty's body grew weaker and weaker, a storm was gradually brewing within the empire. That old fox Candide told you not to get too close to Lawrence because he was worried that Lawrence's identity would affect your future. These words from Emily's mouth greatly shocked Han Shoror. Han Shoror had never thought that Lawrence would actually have such a lofty identity. If the situation developed smoothly, it was entirely possible that Lawrence would become the next king of the empire, holding all the power within the Lancelot Empire and dictating the life and death of any person. Seeing Han Shoror take a deep breath and his eyes continuously twinkle, Emily understood that her words had greatly affected Han Shoror. Seeing that Han Shoror was deep in thought, Emily didn't open her mouth to disturb Han Shoror. She only stood there and looked at Han Shoror, waiting for Han Shoror to sort out his own thoughts. After a while, Han Shoror nodded and smiled at Emily. "All right, I understand. Don't worry, I know how to handle my relationship with Lawrence. Our Dark Mantle has never interfered with complicated internal affairs of the royal family. We only listen to His Majesty's orders. Before the situation is clear and His Majesty has given a definite indication, we normally won't get involved. Candide, that old fox, was able to vaguely warn you after your first mission. This means that he thinks very highly of you. He has good intentions towards you. The more you know about these matters, the more disadvantageous it will be for you. It's because I understand you too well and know of your strength and ambitions that I'm telling you such confidential matters. However, it's still up to you to decide how to grasp and decide." Emily looked at Han Shoror and explained. "I know that you're doing this for my own good. Heh, I know what to do. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I've already killed Clark. Valin City should be in chaos right now." Han Shoror smiled faintly at Emily. It was Emily's turn to be shocked when she heard these words. She looked incredulously at Han Shoror and asked with great surprise, What did you say? You said you killed Clark?" Nodding, Han Shoror said with certainty, "Correct, I did kill Clark, but someone helped me in the middle. In addition, I only managed to do it because of a sneak attack. Don't be too surprised." Exhaling lightly, Emily was still quite astonished. She shook her head. "We've investigated Clark's strength. He's absolutely an Earth Knight. He reached the strength of an Earth Knight at such a young age, and his potential is extraordinary. Who would have thought that you would ambush him and kill him like this? It looks like you're hiding a lot of things from me." "No, I'm really not hiding anything from you. Actually, an Archmage necromancer appeared along the way and I, a fellow necromancer, helped us deal with Clark. We received great help from his strength, Otherwise we wouldn't have been able to succeed at all. Han Shoror smiled wryly and briefly recounted what had happened to Emily. When Han Shoror had finished, Emily's expression became quite grave. She murmured, "Necromancers are already very rare, and Archmage necromancers are even rarer. I really don't know which faction this necromancer belongs to. I'll need you to investigate this," Han Shoror said with a smile. Come with me. We'll go find something." Emily thought for a moment and put on a fur coat from the side, asking Han Shoror to walk out with her. "What do we need to do?" Han Shoror walked up to Emily and gently tidied up the corners of Emily's clothes. Smiling charmingly at Han Shoror, Emily laughed naughtily like a little girl about to do something naughty. "Clark just died. Valin City must be in a state of chaos right now. The Griffin Legion must be in a frenzy right now, searching the entire city for traces of you. What we need to do is take advantage of the chaos and make things even more chaotic." "Heh, that's great. I've discovered that I like to do bad things. Perhaps I was a murderer and arsonist in my past life." Han Shoror smiled faintly. "You're also a very bad bastard in this life." Emily rolled her eyes at Han Shoror and removed the boundary, walking out with Han Shoror. Chapter 154. In the span of a few months, of Bob Asher's two sons, one had mysteriously disappeared, and the other had been killed on the streets. This was too much of a blow to him. Clark was his most valued son, the one he'd placed the most hope on. Now that he'd been killed in Valin City, he'd gone completely insane. That night in Valin City was destined to be a time of chaos. All of the Griffin Legion soldiers had been gathered and were going from house to house, searching for suspicious characters. Due to the chief's rage, the ordinary soldiers of the Griffin Legion were also in a bad temper. All unfamiliar merchants and adventurers who didn't cooperate in the slightest might face a vicious beating. The sound of hooves thundered through the streets, waking up the people who were sleeping in the middle of the night. Even the symbol of the Griffin Legion, a Griffin Legion, was hovering in the night sky above Valin City, making everyone feel as if they were facing a great enemy. They even thought that the Kossi Empire had invaded in the middle of the night. The griffins were like black dots in the sky, their strange cries deafening to the ears. They flew from the west to the south, and then from the south to the north. Whenever they saw any strange movements below, they would land and move with the soldiers on the ground. So these are griffins. They look quite large. Han Shoror stood behind a large tree on a street near Bob Asher's slave shop, murmuring to himself as he watched a pair of griffins fly past. Indeed, griffins are a very ferocious flying unit. A single griffin has the ability to tear apart ordinary magical creatures. This Griffin Legion is a very important reason why His Majesty thinks so highly of old Bob and doesn't dare to act rashly despite knowing that he has intentions of rebelling. Emily exhaled lightly and explained to Han Shoror, shivering a bit. It was a cold winter night, and some of the puddles on the streets had already formed thick blocks of ice. The ice needles hanging from the houses glinted coldly under the moonlight. As the cold wind blew, it was only natural that a mage like Emily would feel cold. Sucking in a breath of cold air, Han Shoror held Emily's tender little hand with his right hand and circulated his demonic yuan. Han Shoror's right hand was like a small stove, bringing warmth to Emily. "You're a necromancer, and at the same time, you've also trained in a special martial technique. But why are you still able to use fire magic? Moreover, you're using it so skillfully, as if you can adjust the temperature according to your will. How are you able to do it?" Emily's charming eyes sparkled as she stared at Han Shoror, rebuking Han Shoror. "Actually, this is one of the martial techniques that I practice. Don't be so surprised." Han Shoror shrugged his shoulders and explained to Emily honestly. It was a pity that Emily didn't believe Han Shoror's explanation in the slightest, but Emily didn't pursue the matter. She smiled faintly. All right, I'll discover all your secrets one day. Your mysteriousness is a kind of poison to me. I've discovered that the more I want to know everything about you, the more mysterious you become. Don't be love-struck. Let's go. Han Shoror reached out with a smile and slapped Emily's round butt, urging Emily to walk faster. The two of them didn't bring Chester with them this time. When they arrived at the slave shop where Lisa had been auctioned off last time, Hanshoro released a dark mist magic and shrouded the surrounding walls in an even darker environment. Heh, your grasp of necromancy magic isn't bad now. Emily laughed lowly. As an archmage, she used the levitation spell and slowly rose into the air, landing on a 5-meter-tall wall. She spoke again. I'll wrap the rope inside, you can use it to climb over. Why go to so much trouble? Hanshoro laughed lowly and his body abruptly shot through the air. His speed was faster and steadier than Emily's levitation spell, and he landed beside Emily in the blink of an eye. Her body suddenly froze in place and Emily looked at Hanshoro as if she'd seen a ghost in broad daylight. Her beautiful eyes sparkled and she threw herself into Hanshoro's arms, using all her strength to pound Hanshoro's chest. She cursed with a mixture of anger and joy, "You annoying bastard, you've clearly reached the archmage level long ago and you've been lying to me. I'll fight it out with you, you bastard, you bastard." When Hanshoro heard the strange sounds coming from afar, he didn't dare stay at a high place in case he attracted the attention of bystanders. He abruptly grabbed Emily and flew down, hiding in a corner of the slave trading house. He then grabbed Emily's little hand and explained with a rueful smile, "I didn't lie to you. This flying method is similar to the levitation spell and is one of the martial arts techniques I've trained in. It has nothing to do with magic. Think carefully, did you feel any magical pulses from my body just now?" Emily started when she heard Hanshoro's words and her long eyelashes fluttered in confusion. She then looked at Hanshoro in shock and asked incredulously, "Just what kind of martial arts technique are you training in? According to my understanding, even the strongest swordsman or sacred knight can only use fighting aura to fly into the air for a short period of time. That kind of martial arts technique can't even be called a flying technique. How can you do it? I've said before that the martial arts technique I train in is a bit more wondrous. It's hard for me to explain it to you." Hanshoro indeed couldn't say much about the training of magical arts and could only explain it to Emily this way. All right. I knew I wouldn't be able to get anything out of you. Let's go. Let's take advantage of the chaos in Valen City and see if we can get anything useful from this slave trading house." Emily rolled her eyes at Hanshoro in rebuke and tugged on Hanshoro's arm as they walked the familiar path towards the slave trading house. Emily must have carefully investigated this slave trading house beforehand and was very familiar with the buildings here. Her body floated in midair as she walked and didn't make a single sound. A layer of black magic as thin as a cicada's wings formed around her body, concealing the condition of her body. Hanshoro had long since become familiar with this kind of shady business. Not only did he not make a single sound, but he also used his extraordinary senses to continuously point the way for Emily, allowing the two to avoid the many guards patrolling along the way. After a while, the two passed through the two buildings of the auction house they'd passed last time and headed deeper into the back 3 buildings. This slave trading house usually has soldiers from the Griffin Legion stationed here. It'll be very difficult for us to leave once we've been discovered. However, because of Clark's death today, the soldiers inside will definitely be mobilized to conduct a manhunt for all of Valen City. This is the best opportunity for us, Emily explained to Hanshoro as they walked. Hanshoro became serious once they got down to business. He listened to Emily's words as he silently observed the surroundings. At this moment, an extremely odd smell surged into Hanshoro's nostrils. This smell was mixed with the smell of blood and it was a bit pungent as Hanshoro slowly took in the air. Sniffing, Hanshoro reached out a hand to pull Emily and said lowly, "There's the smell of blood. Something doesn't seem right here either." "I don't think so." Emily sniffed hard and spoke with surprise. She thought for a moment and seemed to remember Hanshoro's miracles. She said, "See if you can find the direction the smell of blood is coming from." Nodding, Hanshoro said lowly, "Follow me." Grabbing Emily's little hand, Hanshoro used his nose to search for the direction of the smell of blood. He passed 2 buildings on the side and arrived next to a pond. There was a fake mountain next to the pond with several dark caves within. Hanshoro's ears and nose were put to good use as he led Emily into one of the caves. A creaking sound suddenly rang out as the originally thick stone wall suddenly split apart. A terrified Imperial guard rushed out from within, his body covered in blood. He hadn't even taken a few steps when a bone spear suddenly appeared out of thin air and pierced through the Imperial guard's back. Two zombie warriors then walked out and dragged the Imperial guard's corpse inside. This scene was seen clearly by Han Shoror and Emily, who had just entered and taken the opportunity to hide on the side. Han Shoror stared blankly for a moment and suddenly said, "Perhaps the necromancer I saw today is inside right now." This is highly possible, but the owner of this slave shop is Bob Asher, and that necromancer is also one of Clark's killers. Why would he appear here? Emily was a bit puzzled as she conversed with Han Shoror in a low voice. The most dangerous place is the safest place. The entire city is on high alert right now, and this slave shop is Bob Asher's property. Large amounts of soldiers have been deployed, so no one would have thought that he'd appear here. One of the guards was killed just now, which means that this necromancer isn't a customer here. It's very likely that he's here to hide. Han Shoror thought for a moment and opened his mouth to speak slowly. What you say makes a lot of sense. Should we take a look then? Emily spoke approvingly and asked Han Shoror for his opinion. Of course, I'm also quite curious about this necromancer. If I were to face him alone, I'd probably have no choice but to run, but now that you're here, we don't need to fear him. Han Shoror opened his mouth to speak and paused. Han Shoror listened attentively to the movements inside and said after a while, "All right, the footsteps of the zombie warriors have faded away. Let's go take a look." Chapter 155. The two saw corpses littering the ground as soon as they entered the cave. A rough estimate estimated that there were at least a few dozen bodies. Judging from the clothing on their bodies, there were guards from the slave shop, nobles who had come to choose their slaves, and even slaves who had been imprisoned in cages. Torches burned on the surrounding walls, illuminating the area. This place was most likely used to imprison slaves. There were many iron bars in the surroundings, and there were also some instruments of torture in the middle. It looked like they were used to discipline disobedient slaves. A high platform had been built with black stones in the center, and a corpse was tied to several pillars. There was a square groove about 3 meters wide in the center of the platform, and a strong stench of blood emanated from it. More than 10 zombie warriors were summoned and lifted the corpses on the ground, throwing them one by one into the pool of blood in the center of the platform. When the intact corpses fell into the pool of blood, they sank into it with a splash. The pool of blood then bubbled with a gurgling sound, calming down after a while as the water level in the pool rose a few notches. As more and more corpses were thrown into the pool of blood, more and more blood appeared in the pool, almost filling it to the brim. In the corner of the platform, the necromancer that Han Shoror had seen last time was holding a white bone staff and revealing his appearance. His body was emaciated, and he was looking expressionlessly at the pool of blood. No signs of life could be seen in his grayish-brown eyes. Han Shoror and Selena immediately retreated to a corner when they entered, only using the cracks in the corners to observe everything. Emily set up a soundproof boundary around the two and immediately said in a low voice, "It looks like this necromancer is setting up some sort of altar. I wonder what he's planning on doing." Shaking his head, Han Shoror's expression was grave as he said lowly, "I don't know if it's because I've grasped too little necromancy magic, but I don't know anything about this altar that the necromancer is setting up. It looks like an archmage necromancer has grasped many powerful necromancy spells indeed." As Han Shoror and Emily spoke in low voices, the necromancer waved the white bone staff in his hand and chanted a spell in a low voice. The blood in the pool of blood on the altar suddenly began to swirl, and the corpses that had been tied to the pillars were instantly stripped of their flesh and blood, becoming a few sets of eerie white skeletons. Another spell of necromancy was chanted, and the souls on the ground that hadn't yet dispersed seemed to materialize as they transformed into clouds of grayish-brown smoke, surging into the pool of blood in the center of the altar. The blood in the blood pool formed a whirlpool, and the bones of the corpses that had just sunk to the bottom were revealed one by one. Then, these white bones slowly pieced together, gradually forming a three-eyed evil god with 8 horns on its head and a barbed tail at its waist. This three-eyed evil god was formed from white bones. Its 3 eyes were red, yellow, and blue, like triangles embedded on its forehead. When it was still forming, a vast and enormous evil presence spread from its body, filling the entire area with its evil presence. It was a kind of ruthless, murderous, and extremely bloodthirsty evil. Even from a great distance, Han Shor felt a chill in his heart. His eyes abruptly locked onto the 3-eyed evil god, not leaving it for even a second as he focused all of his attention on all of its movements. Oh, my gosh, he's connected to the 3-eyed evil god, Ansadesi, through the altar. Emily groaned in disbelief, her beautiful eyes filled with shock. Gods were powerful beings of legend, and they had the ability to penetrate the heavens and the earth. However, they were bound by the laws of the plane and couldn't reveal their true forms in this world. However, through some rituals and mediums, some people in this world could actually use profound secret techniques to communicate with the gods. All this time, Han Shor had thought that this kind of unproven theory was very absurd and that it was something that couldn't possibly exist. But now that the truth was right in front of him, Han Shor had no choice but to believe it. Seeing that they were separated by who knew how many planes of existence, the 3-eyed evil god, Ansadesi, had used this necromancer's ritual to descend his consciousness onto the white skeleton. Han Shor stood there in a daze, his thoughts a mess. A series of mysterious and ancient sounds came from the mouth of the 3-eyed evil god. Han Shor and Emily were both baffled and didn't know what this string of sounds meant. However, the skinny necromancer seemed to be able to communicate directly with him. The necromancer was prostrating on the ground, his head buried deep in his chest as he kowtowed. He suddenly lifted his head with a look of fear and trepidation, and then quickly chanted an incantation. The Life Scout necromancy magic was released, and it suddenly floated in all directions. Not good. When Han Shor saw this magic appear, he immediately knew that he was in trouble. He suddenly gave a low cry and planned to pull Emily away from this place. Unfortunately, he was still a step too late. The Life Scout magic spread out in all directions, and suddenly lit up when it neared where Han Shor and Emily were. The face of the kneeling necromancer immediately darkened and he suddenly waved his white bone staff. The dozen or so zombie warriors that had stopped in the surroundings suddenly walked towards Han Shor and Emily. "We've been exposed, we have to leave immediately." Emily shouted and suddenly retreated, planning to take Han Shor and leave this place. At this moment, the sharp-eyed Han Shor saw that because of the necromancer's distraction, the body of the 3-eyed evil god, Ansadesi, that had just been formed from white bones, suddenly collapsed into the blood pool on the altar. It looked like the necromancer couldn't be distracted for even a moment in order to use the mysterious magic to use the blood and bones in the blood pool to communicate with the 3-eyed evil god Ansadesi. If the necromancer was distracted to deal with Han Shor and Emily, then Ansadesi, who had crossed who knew how many planes of existence to descend upon this place with his consciousness, wouldn't be able to use the blood and bones to appear. The 3-eyed evil god Ansadesi can't help him, the two of us don't need to be afraid of him. Han Shor's body paused and he stopped at the entrance of the cave. He even grabbed Emily's retreating body with a backhand grip. Emily's beautiful eyes focused on the altar as soon as she heard Han Shor's words. She also discovered that the 3-eyed evil god had disappeared into the blood pool. She immediately calmed down and shouted, "Who are you to dare use such an evil ceremony to summon the 3-eyed evil god Ansadesi in Valin City? The two of you shouldn't have barged in, otherwise I wouldn't have killed you." The skinny necromancer used a levitation spell to fly towards Han Shor and Emily after saying these words in a hoarse voice. He waved the white bone staff in his hand and released a high-level necromancy spell, Chains of the Grudge Spirits. Dozens of grudge spirits tangled together and formed a long metal chain that moved towards Han Shor and Emily. The dozen or so zombie warriors also raised their wooden clubs and arrived in front of Han Shor and Emily, immediately attacking Han Shor and Emily. Emily snorted delicately and took out her magic staff. She chanted a dark magic spell, and a pitch-black death scythe suddenly took shape in the air. She pointed her magic staff at it and it slashed towards the zombie warriors. The zombie warriors' bodies were as fragile as paper under the death scythe's slashes. They were torn apart in an instant, and not a single one was able to get close to Han Shor and Emily. As the chains of the grudge spirits wrapped around them, Han Shuo's Demon Slayer Edge suddenly whistled as he activated the mystical glacial spellfire, causing the Demon Slayer Edge to explode with blinding red light. The temperature of the entire space suddenly soared as the red spellfire enveloped the Demon Slayer Edge and burned fiercely, rapidly descending towards the chains of the grudge spirits. The chains of the grudge spirits, formed by dozens of grudge spirits, opened their mouths and screamed in terror under the scorching temperature of the Demon Slayer Edge's red world spellfire. When the Demon Slayer Edge whistled into the chains of the grudge spirits, the chains of the grudge spirits made squeaking sounds and grey smoke rose from it. Dozens of grudge spirits screamed as their souls were destroyed. 3 bone spears suddenly formed and abruptly pierced towards Han Shuo and Emily. Han Shuo used his mind to control the Demon Slayer Edge to block the 2 bone spears flying towards Emily. He also chanted a necromancy spell in a low voice, and a bone spear pierced through the air, accurately colliding with the other bone spear that was attacking him. "Hey, kid, you're also a necromancer," the skinny necromancer suddenly exclaimed in surprise and looked at Han Shuo with great surprise. "Heh, indeed. We even joined hands to kill Clark when we were at Calvert's place just now. This is the second time we've met tonight." Han Shuo looked at the necromancer with a calm expression and smiled faintly. Last time at Calvert's house, Han Shuo had covered his face at first and had only taken off his mask when he killed Clark. When the necromancer had attacked Han Shuo, the two had been quite a distance apart. Because it had been the middle of the night, the necromancer hadn't clearly seen Han Shuo's face. It was obvious that Han Shuo hadn't recognized him this time. "So it's you," the necromancer exclaimed lowly and quickly floated towards Han Shuo again. He said darkly, "We're both necromancers. Let me see if you've understood the mysteries of necromancy." The necromancer attacked again after he'd finished speaking, looking like he wanted to kill off Han Shuo first. Chapter 156. I've only just started and was just about to ask for your guidance. Han Shuo wasn't afraid of him. There was also the dark archmage, Emily, by his side. With the 2 of them fighting him, they definitely wouldn't be at a disadvantage. Thus, when the necromancer floated over, Han Shuo didn't seem nervous at all. The necromancer's figure was as elusive as a ghost, constantly changing directions as he neared Han Shuo and Emily. When he was only 10 meters away from the 2, the archmage suddenly waved his white bone staff and chanted a necromancy incantation in a low voice. An evil knight with dark brown skin and a body covered in black metal armor, was over 3 meters tall, and was riding a howling beast that was even more robust than a wild rhinoceros. Its body was covered in brown scales, and it raised a spiked club that was as thick as a person. It urged the howling beast beneath it to charge viciously towards Han Shuo and Emily. Evil knights were dark creatures of a higher level than hate knights. Only archmage necromancers could summon them. They came from the dark abyss of another dimension, and the black metal armor on their bodies had excellent physical defense. Their ferocious strength combined with the howling beast's charge was a nightmare for anyone. As soon as the evil knight appeared, he urged the howling beast to charge at Han Shuo and Emily, raising his spiked club high above his head and smashing it down like an iron pillar. When Emily saw the evil knight appear, she immediately retreated without saying a word. She chanted a dark magic incantation in a low voice, and the enormous Grim Reaper's scythe, which had yet to disappear, once again slashed at the evil knight under Emily's control. After summoning the evil knight, the necromancer didn't take another step forward. Instead, he quickly dodged to the back, summoning a group of gargoyles to attack Han Shuo as he continued to fire bone spears in all directions. Compared to the fights between the students of the academy, this necromancer was obviously a veteran of 100 battles. He had a very accurate grasp of the timing of the battle. He had drifted towards Han Shuo's group in order to summon the evil knight in front of them. He wanted to charge at them at close range so that they wouldn't have much of a chance to defend themselves. The Demon Slayer Edge followed Han Shuo's will and once again spiraled out, bringing with it the fiery red spell flames, shooting towards the group of attacking gargoyles. Han Shuo chanted a bone shield spell and abruptly placed it in front of him, blocking the bone spear from piercing through. After blocking 2 attacks from the bone spears, the bone shield ran out of magic power and cracked. At this moment, Han Shoror's mental strength quickly condensed and circulated, suddenly summoning the little skull. He even used his consciousness to tell the little skull to deal with the evil knight. The evil knight riding the howling beast was an extremely high-level dark creature. When faced with the Grim Reaper scythe formed by Emily's dark magic, he very nimbly used the spiked mace in his hands to defend himself. The spiked mace that had appeared with him in this plane was extremely sturdy and didn't break at all when it collided with the Grim Reaper scythe formed by Emily's magic. "Oh, do you only know how to summon skeletal warriors?" The necromancer was very confused when he saw that Han Shoror had only summoned a strange little skull warrior after quickly chanting a spell. Han Shoror didn't reply with a calm smile on his face. He only used his consciousness to instruct the little skull to attack the evil knight. The 2 leg bones suddenly shot out, and the 7 bone spurs on the little skull's back swayed as he actually flew into the air. The bone dagger that he had been holding tightly was the first to shoot out, quickly stabbing towards the evil knight's back like a bolt of lightning. The evil knight that was facing the Grim Reaper scythe seemed to be a bit disdainful. He only shook his shoulders slightly, and black iron armor covered his back. The necromancer had a mocking smile on his face as he watched the little skull's attack. He wasn't worried about the evil knight that he had summoned at all. Just as the little skull's bone dagger was about to land on the evil knight's back, the bone dagger magically froze in the air for a moment. Then, it suddenly changed direction and stabbed into the evil knight's exposed neck with a whoosh. The evil knight that was facing the Grim Reaper scythe's attack suddenly let out a series of strange, mournful cries as he waved the huge wolf tooth club in his hands wildly. With a pu sound, the scythe that Emily had condensed passed through the wolf tooth club's bombardment and chopped down on the howling beast beneath the evil knight. The howling beast's head was directly chopped off, and sparks of light shone from its head. At the same time, the little skull that had flown over had already landed in front of the evil knight. The 7 bone spurs on his back instantly danced as if he was using the chaotic cloak technique. The 7 bone spurs fiercely stabbed at the evil knight's body that wasn't covered in black iron armor. The little skull also pulled out the bone dagger that had been stuck in the evil knight's neck. He held it in his hand and continuously stabbed it into the evil knight's body. The originally shiny black iron armor of the evil knight suddenly underwent a huge change along with the howling beast's loud roar. The black iron armor suddenly rusted, and the originally thick and lustrous body of the evil knight turned to dust as if it had been weathered away. In the blink of an eye, it had disappeared without a trace. Even the howling beast he was riding had turned to ashes like him. This was a sign that all traces of life had been completely erased. After the evil knight had disappeared, Emily let out a light breath and calmed her tightly clenched heart. The Grim Reaper scythe had also disappeared along with it. The one that remained in place was still the little skull holding the bone dagger. Little Skull waved the bone dagger a bit, and the 7 bone spurs that had been scattered on the ground flew back to his back. At this time, the disdain on the necromancer's face had long since disappeared without a trace. He looked at Little Skull in disbelief and cried out in shock, "Impossible, absolutely impossible. Not even 100 skeletal warriors could harm an evil knight. This goes against the common sense of necromancy." A calm smile still hung on his face as Han Shoror said very casually, "Nothing is impossible. Although I don't grasp as much necromancy as you, I don't think there's anything that I can't understand." The bone dagger wielding little skeleton's leg trembled as he gave the order. He'd already locked onto the necromancer and quickly flew towards the necromancer. He jumped in fright and then chuckled oddly, "Good, very good. Then let me see just what secrets you have." A necromancy incantation came out of his mouth and he quickly approached Han Shoror. Just as he was about to draw close to the little skull, the necromancer suddenly flew high into the air and threw out the white bone staff in his hand, suddenly covering Han Shoror's head. In the blink of an eye, an enormous amount of evil mental strength surged into Han Shoror's mind through the white bone staff. Like a magnet, it attempted to take over Han Shoror's memories for itself. A proud smile appeared on the necromancer's face as he yelled darkly at the panicking Emily, "Don't act blindly without thinking. I've already established a connection with his soul. If I suddenly die, his soul will scatter as well and he'll become an idiot. Emily was stunned when she heard these words. She then looked anxiously at Han Shoror. She discovered that Han Shoror's expression had become absent-minded in just an instant. His eyes were unfocused as he stood there, as if he were a statue or a stone person. Even the little skull, who'd just received Han Shoror's order to attack the necromancer, suddenly froze in place. He raised his bone dagger and looked around blankly, as if waiting for Han Shoror to give him an order. Haha, this is a necromancy spell I've recently grasped called soul erosion. Using this necromancy spell, I can take over a person's soul as my own. After eroding their soul, I can obtain all their secrets. In this process, I'm connected to the target's soul. If I suddenly die, the target won't be able to escape either, haha. When the necromancer saw that the evil power of the white bone staff had invaded Han Shoror's mind, he immediately explained to Emily with a smug expression. Emily was extremely anxious as she looked at Han Shoror's current state. She didn't know if she should make a move against this necromancer or not. As an archmage, Emily could clearly feel the enormous evil power of the white bone staff above Han Shoror's head pouring into Han Shoror's body. Therefore, Emily really didn't dare to doubt the necromancer's words. Just as Emily was extremely anxious and didn't know what to do, the originally lifeless Han Shoror suddenly let out a shrill howl. Han Shoror's two arms ignited with purple and red flames. His entire body seemed to be wrapped in the purple and red flames. His face looked extremely sinister and frightening, and his entire body was filled with an extremely dangerous aura. At the same time, the necromancer who'd been extremely pleased with himself suddenly paled. His originally relaxed and proud expression abruptly faded as he yelled with extreme fear, "No, don't." Chapter 157. The white bone staff that had been hovering over Han Shoror's head had suddenly flipped over at some point, leaving Han Shoror's head and enveloping the necromancer within. The terrified necromancer continuously chanted necromancy spells in an attempt to retrieve the white bone staff, but it was a pity that he was powerless to do so. At the same time, the demon slayer edge suddenly flew out and abruptly stabbed into the necromancer's chest. Red demonic flames instantly ignited above his head, and Han Shoror suddenly sat down cross-legged. It was his turn to softly chant necromancy spells. In an extremely short amount of time, the necromancer whose head had been enveloped in red demonic flames had been burned beyond recognition. His head was like a piece of black charcoal, and his facial features were no longer discernible. A mysterious incantation sounded from Han Shoror's mouth. Han Shoror waved his hand and the white bone staff shot out a web of green light. This web of green light enveloped the necromancer's head, sucking in something like a whirlpool. A cloud of grey aura suddenly floated out of the necromancer's body. It was the same as the souls of the dead in the field, and was slowly caught in the large green net. It floated in front of Han Shoror along with the white bone staff. When it reached Han Shoror's head, the white bone staff suddenly fell into Han Shoror's hand. The green web, along with the necromancer's soul, flowed through Han Shoror's mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, bit by bit into Han Shoror's head. This series of changes left Emily dumbfounded. She had no idea what had just happened. She couldn't understand why the necromancer, who had been so proud just a moment ago, had lost his soul in an instant and been collected by Han Shoror. After the aura of the green web and the necromancer's soul flowed into Han Shoror's head through his 7 orifices, Han Shoror sat cross-legged without moving. However, his facial expression constantly changed, sometimes joyful, sometimes pained, and sometimes angry. While Han Shoror sat cross-legged without moving, Little Skull, who had been standing in place blankly, seemed to be a bit puzzled. Holding the bone dagger in his hand, he paced around the area. When Little Skull walked to the center of the altar, he actually set his eyes on the blood pool where Ansadesi had summoned the three-eyed demon god. "Get out of there." Emily knew that Little Skull had a mysterious connection with Han Shoror. When she saw Little Skull run to that dangerous place alone, she immediately shouted. The blood pool in the center of the evil altar was formed from the blood of the many guards and merchants here. In addition, the necromancer had added some kind of malicious substance into it. Emily was afraid that the filth in the blood pool would harm Little Skull's body after he entered. Unfortunately, Emily wasn't Han sure. Her words had no effect on Little Skull at all. Her shout of "Get out of there" actually had the opposite effect. Little Skull turned around and rubbed his shiny skull. He looked at Emily with some confusion, then jumped into the blood pool. Oh, heavens, the master is crazy, and even the summoned creature is a little crazy. Emily was about to go crazy with worry and immediately cursed out loud. Although she was cursing, Emily still walked towards the altar, intending to see how she could help Little Skull. When she arrived at the altar, she immediately saw Little Skull splashing around in the blood pool, like an innocent child playing with water. His bony face actually made Emily feel a sense of joy. Oh, what's going on with this Little Skull? Seeing that Little Skull was unharmed and even seemed to be having a lot of fun, Emily was completely at a loss for words. When the corpses fell into the blood pool earlier, their flesh and blood would immediately dissolve, and their bones would also sink into the blood pool without a trace. However, Little Skull didn't seem to be affected at all after entering, which made Emily extremely flabbergasted. Thinking back to the first time she'd met Han Shoror, this Little Skull was immune to many dark magic and had chased after her in a frenzy. Emily couldn't help but shake her head with a wry smile. She thought to herself, it looks like I really can't understand some things. Suddenly, Emily's long eyelashes fluttered rapidly as her eyes stared at the blood pool in confusion. When she looked closely, Emily discovered that the amount of blood in the blood pool seemed to be gradually decreasing. When Emily focused her eyes on Little Skull, she suddenly discovered that the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back seemed to be absorbing the blood in the blood pool. This strange discovery caused Emily to groan in shock. She muttered softly, "Heavens, what kind of demon did he create?" The blood in the blood pool was gradually absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back as he played with the water. When the bottom of the blood pool could be seen, many of the white bones in the pool seemed to be affected by some kind of power and turned into bone powder that fused with the remaining blood. Then, they were absorbed by the 7 bone spurs along with the blood. This process lasted for half an hour. Everything in the blood pool was absorbed by the 7 bone spurs on Little Skull's back. When the blood pool was emptied, Emily discovered that the 7 bone spurs on the little skeleton's back had completely turned a demonic red, like fresh blood. They even faintly emitted a bloody glow, making them look even more terrifying and incisive. The blood pool was square in shape, and was more than 3 meters deep after everything disappeared. Little Skull was only a little more than a meter tall. At this moment, he was looking at Emily from the pool, seemingly considering how to climb up. "You're out of ideas now, aren't you?" Emily huffed. She was about to let down a rope and pull Little Skull up. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Little Skull fanned the 7 blood-red bone spurs and wobbled out from the bottom of the blood pool. When he landed beside the dumbstruck Emily, Little Skull didn't even look at Emily. He fanned the 7 bone spurs again and flew to Han Shoror, who was still sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed. "Damn it, you're just as despicable as your master." Although Little Skull didn't have any expression on his face, Emily felt that Little Skull was immensely proud of himself and couldn't help but curse out loud. Emily then saw Little Skull continue to fan the 7 bone spurs and fly around the enormous room. At first, they were wobbly, but gradually became very stable as he flew around. His speed also became faster and faster. In the end, Emily, who was chasing after him, couldn't even turn her eyes. At this moment, Han Shoror exhaled softly and suddenly said, "It's finally done." Emily was shocked and stopped looking at Little Skull. Her beautiful eyes suddenly landed on Han Shoror. Suddenly, Emily froze and looked into Han Shoror's eyes with great astonishment. For a moment, she actually forgot to ask Han Shoror what was going on. Han Shoror's eyes suddenly became exceedingly bright, as dazzling as the brightest star in the vast starry sky. They appeared so enchanting, so deep, yet also gave people a sense of unfathomable mystery. "What's wrong?" Han Shoror looked at Emily's love-struck expression and couldn't help but stand up and walk in front of Emily. He pinched Emily's delicate cheeks and asked with some confusion, "No, nothing, I just discovered that your eyes are brighter, and even your aura seems to have changed. Emily blushed a bit shyly as she pushed Han Shuo's hand away from her cheeks and stammered to Han Shuo. Heh, so there are such additional benefits to corroding this necromancer's soul. Han Shuo laughed happily and said cheerfully, "Hurry up and tell me, just what's going on?" Emily's curiosity at this moment was enough to kill her. She suddenly reached out and grabbed Han Shuo by the neck and said fiercely, "Cough cough, all right. Pushing Emily's hands away from his neck, Han Shuo explained with a smile, "I told you before that the martial arts technique I practice is very miraculous. Not only did it strengthen my body, but it also expanded my brain. Just now, he wanted to use the soul erosion magic to take over my soul and obtain all my memories. However, during this process, due to the expansion of my brain, I was also affected by the soul erosion magic and was able to sense all the memories of his soul. Logically speaking, a necromancer of my level definitely wouldn't have the mental strength and processing speed of his brain compared to someone who'd practiced soul erosion. Then, a normal person would have their soul taken over and their memories taken over before they could even figure out his name. It's a pity that my brain has been brutally strengthened and the tenacity of my nerves isn't something he can imagine. I was faster than him and obtained all of the memories in his soul. I then took over his soul and obtained everything of him. It's that simple." Emily was flabbergasted when she heard this explanation from Han Shuo's mouth. Her face was full of disbelief as she looked at Han Shuo and kept shaking her head as she said lowly, "Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Just what kind of monster are you?" Han Shuo hugged Emily tightly and said with a cheeky grin, all right, don't be so surprised. We can leave this place now." The demon slayer edge that was still stuck in the necromancer's chest suddenly flew up after he'd finished speaking and landed in Han Shuo's hand in an instant. There was still a severed finger at the tip of the demon slayer edge. There was a space ring on the severed finger, which Han Shuo unceremoniously put away. "Stinking brat, stop flying around. Get down here." Little Skull, who was still happily circling in the air, laughed and called out. Little Skull flew in front of Han Shuo and suddenly stopped in front of Han Shuo, waving his bone dagger as he glided in the air. He entered the blood pool and absorbed all the blood and bone powder in the blood pool into the 7 bone spurs. Emily was afraid that Han Shuo didn't know what Little Skull had done when he closed his eyes and hastily explained to Han Shuo. Nodding, Han Shuo said with a smile, "I know, this isn't the first time he's been so daring. This isn't a big deal. Look, he can even fly now, isn't that great? I don't even know what kind of demon you've created. I discovered that he seems to have his own emotions. I don't know if it's just my imagination, but when I laughed at him for not being able to climb out of the blood pool, he immediately flew out proudly. Really, I can feel that he's really showing off in front of me, I promise." Emily looked at Little Skull and seemed to suddenly remember what had just happened. She hastily explained to Han Shuo, "Heh, don't be surprised. There are too many inconceivable things in this world. I believe that what you're saying isn't an illusion because I've had the same feeling before. Right now, I'm not sure what's going on, but I think that in the future, as he continues to evolve, he'll give me an explanation." Han Shuo wasn't surprised at all and pointed at Little Skull with a smile. Emily was stunned when she heard this. After a while, she looked at Little Skull with a wry smile, then looked at Han Shuo and scolded, "What two monsters? There's nothing to be surprised about, you have to learn to adapt to everything about me. Because, I think that more and more amazing things will happen to me in the future." Han Shuo laughed loudly and seemed to be in a very good mood. "Brian, your growth is so fast, your future accomplishments are unimaginable. Who knows, maybe I won't be able to help you very soon. As for me, I'm just a widow. Will you abandon me in the future?" Emily looked at the current Han Shuo and suddenly thought of the future. Her beautiful eyes looked at Han Shuo and asked a bit strangely, "Don't be silly, I'm with you not because you can help me with anything. Even if our identities change in the future, it won't affect us at all." Han Shuo looked deeply at Emily as he said this. When he saw Emily's happy expression, he pulled on Emily and said, Let's go. Let's leave this place first, We don't need to go anywhere else. I think I've already gotten what you need. The two didn't continue to linger and left hand in hand. The sky had just begun to brighten, so they took advantage of the fact that no one was paying attention and left the place as stealthily as they had come. Chapter 158. The Dark Mantle had their own secret rooms in every city in the Lancelot Empire, and Valin City was naturally no exception. Han Shoror sat cross-legged by himself in a secret underground room built from solid rock, slowly digesting the memories of the necromancer's soul. Han Shoror didn't take a step out of the secret room for 4 days in a row as he went through the necromancer's decades of memories in his mind. The necromancer named Clarendon was already 52 years old. Han Shoror had extracted, filtered, and digested everything he'd experienced in the past 52 years. Han Shoror used these 4 days to absorb and memorize dozens of battle experiences, his lifetime's comprehension of necromancy magic, and some of the secrets of his identity. Of course, Han Shoror was too lazy to use his brain to remember the other unimportant matters. After learning all of the necromancer's experiences, Han Shoror learned that Clarendon had always belonged to an organization called the Calamity Church, and had been acting under the orders of the Calamity Church's upper echelons. The operation against Clark this time was completely under the orders of the upper echelons. Clarendon himself didn't know why he had to assassinate Clark. Apart from some matters regarding his identity, Han Shoror's greatest gain was that he'd obtained some of the necromancer Clarendon's magical experiences from apprentice to archmage, as well as all of his battle experiences and comprehension before his death. If there really was such a thing as reaching the heavens in a single step in this world, then Han Shoror was one of them. Obtaining the necromancer's magical body and battle experiences would allow Han Shoror to avoid many detours before he became an archmage. As long as he had enough mental strength, he'd be able to quickly and immediately learn high-level necromancy magic. Clarendon's dozens of battle experiences had greatly enriched Han Shoror's horizons, and would be immeasurably beneficial to Han Shoror's future battles. The immature Han Shoror knew everything that needed to be avoided and paid attention to. This kind of gain wasn't any less than the comprehension of necromancy magic. After 4 days, Han Shoror had obtained all of Clarendon's valuable memories. However, he did not immediately leave the secret room. Instead, he continued to stay in this secret room and spent another 2 days mastering the other necromancy spells that a journeyman mage should know. When Han Shoror walked out of the secret chamber, he felt refreshed and in a good mood. He was even more confident about this operation. Chester was guarding the door. When he saw Han Shoror appear, he respectfully said to Han Shoror, "You're finally out. Lady Emily told me to bring you to her immediately once you came out." "Hey, Chester, why are you so serious now? I remember you weren't like this when I first met you." Chester's tone had been quite casual and relaxed when he'd interacted with him before, but Chester was noticeably more reserved in front of Han Shoror now. His tone was more like a subordinate talking to his superior. This made Han Shoror a bit puzzled. "Brian, you're sure to be a great personage in the future. I'm just getting used to it in advance." Chester relaxed slightly and said with a smile. Shaking his head, Han Shoror said casually, "Even if I do become a great personage, our relationship shouldn't be so distant." Clapping Chester's shoulder, Han Shoror said with a relaxed smile, "Really, mate, relax a bit. You're making me feel a bit awkward when you're so serious." All right, I know what to do. Brian, hurry up and go see Lady Emily. She said to bring you to her immediately once you left." With Han Shoror patting his shoulder and talking to him, Chester seemed to be a bit more at ease. He chuckled lightly and quickly led Han Shoror to a brightly lit walkway. After a few minutes, Han Shoror walked out of the secret underground room and came to the room where Emily was. After arriving here, Chester winked at Han Shoror and retreated to the side with a chuckle. He only stopped to guard the place after he was a distance away. In the past few days of getting along, although Han Shoror and Emily had deliberately concealed their identities, the tone and movements of their conversation still revealed some ambiguous information. As a thief, Chester was very quick-witted. After getting along for a few days, he naturally discovered some clues. However, Chester was a smart man. He knew that only by getting on well with Han Shoror would he have a chance to climb up. Therefore, he knew that even if he understood some things in his heart, he had to pretend that he didn't understand. Han Shoror also understood this in his heart, so he wasn't worried that Chester would say anything. Looking at Chester winking at him, Han Shoror still had a calm expression on his face. He pushed the door open and walked into Emily's room without any taboo. "Who's there?" Emily was taken aback and suddenly exclaimed from the bathroom inside. Han Shoror even heard the sound of water droplets. With a jolt in his heart, Han Shoror already knew that Emily was taking a bath at this time. After 6 consecutive days of seclusion, Han Shoror had been holding it in for quite a long time. Therefore, after a smirk, he closed the door with a backhand and quickly shot directly into Emily's bathroom. Emily, who was a little panicked at first, immediately knew who it was as soon as she heard Han Shoror's smirk. She couldn't help but blush, and her perfect, wet body fell back into the bathtub again. "The thief is here." Han Shoror chuckled mischievously and circulated his magical yuan. The clothes on his body suddenly tore apart and fell to the ground, revealing his strong, muscular, and domineering body. He leapt into the bath, causing a huge splash. "Evil thief, I hate you." Emily laughed coquettishly as she slapped at the water, seeming to stop Han Shoror's invasion. However, her curses turned into bone-chilling, soul-sucking moans after the span of a few breaths. After a long while, Emily's entire body spasmed and convulsed. She moaned loudly and the splashes in the pool slowly returned to normal. "So beautiful." Emily gasped lowly and lay her body on Han Shoror's broad chest. She said happily, "The evil thing that I love and hate at the same time." Leaning lazily on the edge of the pool, Han Shoror said contentedly, "Soaking in such a warm bath in such a cold winter is indeed one of life's great joys." "Oh right, why were you looking for me so urgently? What do you think?" "Of course I wanted to ask you what you've gained in the past few days." Emily's slender hands unconsciously slid down Han Shoror's back as she asked Han Shoror. Han Shoror took in a refreshing breath and recounted his gains in the past few days to Emily in detail. When Han Shoror had finished speaking, Emily was extremely shocked. She looked at Han Shoror and said with wild joy, "You've received his understanding and battle experience in necromancy magic. Does this mean that you can quickly train to the archmage level and grasp all the necromancy magic he's already grasped as long as you have enough mental strength?" "I think so. I've just tried practicing another journeyman necromancy magic and discovered that I've completely grasped it in a short amount of time according to this necromancer's experiences. I didn't take any detours in the middle." Han Shoror nodded affirmatively and responded to Emily. "My gosh, this is too miraculous, too unbelievable." Emily was overjoyed when she heard Han Shoror's words. She couldn't help but repeat these words, seeming to be even more excited than Han Shoror himself. The necromancer found these documents in a secret room in the slave trading house. There are business records regarding Bob Asher and it proves that he was indeed involved in the slave trading house. Han Shoror handed over some of the documents he'd obtained from the necromancer regarding the slave trade to Emily after he'd finished his narration. Although the necromancer named Clarendon had set up a magical boundary in his space ring, Han Shoror had easily opened the magical boundary because he'd obtained all of the necromancer's memories. He'd obtained a few books on necromancy magic, some medicines to recover mental strength, and a few magic robes that could increase the power of magic. Of course, what satisfied Han Shoror the most was the white bone staff that Clarendon had used. This white bone staff should have been made specifically for necromancers. Using this white bone staff to cast necromancy magic would increase the power of Han Shoror's necromancy magic. Originally, when Han Shoror cast the bone spear spell, only one bone spear would appear, but now, he could cast 2 bone spears at once with this white bone staff. Even the number of dark creatures that could be summoned had increased under the same mental strength. Emily was overjoyed as she held the documents that Han Shoror had handed over. She was about to say something when she suddenly thought of something and stared fiercely at Han Shoror. She asked urgently, "What organization did you say this necromancer belonged to?" "The Calamity Church." Han Shor started and responded. Emily's expression changed abruptly as her face turned deathly white. She immediately said to Han Shor, "Don't tell anyone that I killed Clarendon. Also, Lawrence came looking for you and told you to go see him when you have time. You can go now and be careful. I need to report the Calamity Church to my brother immediately." Emily hastily gave Han Shor a few more reminders after she'd finished speaking, telling him not to tell anyone about the Calamity Church. She then quickly left for the secret room where the Dark Mantle communicated with the upper echelons through the magic mirror. Chapter 159. Ever since he'd learned of Lawrence's identity, Han Shor had been mulling over how he should interact with him in the future. Judging from the current situation, Lawrence was obviously planning on participating in the struggle for power between the princes. It was just that his identity was an awkward one, and this would make his situation less optimistic. If Lawrence really could inherit the throne, Han Shor wouldn't mind being a bit closer to him, and would even be willing to go on adventures with him. However, if Lawrence didn't have the strength to do so and rashly stayed with him, it would put Han Shor in an extremely unfavorable situation. Therefore, even though he knew Lawrence's identity, Han Shor pretended that he didn't know anything. He walked to Lawrence's house with his usual expression. It was Assassin Lucky who brought Han Shor in this time. After experiencing the assassination of Clark last time, this old assassin seemed to have completely acknowledged Han Shor's strength. His expression was no longer as cold as before as he brought Han Shor into a living room and said, "He's not here for now, but he can return at any time. You can wait here for a while if you're not in a hurry." Nodding, Han Shor looked at old Assassin Lucky and said with a smile, "No problem, I'll wait for a while." "Oh, right, I saw you deal with Calvert afterwards. Did you kill him in the end?" "Of course, not only Calvert, but even his son was killed by me." Old Assassin Lucky had a proud expression on his face. It looked like he was quite proud of his assassination skills. Han Shor suddenly remembered Lisa's matter as he casually chatted with Lucky. He asked, "Oh right, is Lisa here right now? I want to take advantage of Lawrence's absence to go see her." "Miss Lisa is here. Come with me, I'll take you to see her," Lucky said as he led Han Shor through a courtyard and into a secluded building in the back. He then reminded Han Shor in a low voice, "Miss Lisa's emotions have stabilized due to the deaths of Calvert and his son. However, it's best if you don't bring up matters regarding her family." Nodding in understanding, Han Shor didn't say anything else and approached the building alone, knocking lightly on the door. "Is it Cousin Lawrence?" Lisa asked through the door from inside the room, her voice still a bit sad. "It's me," Han Shor responded. "Oh, Brian, you've come to see me." Han Shor could hear the joy he hadn't felt in a long time from Lisa's voice. Footsteps quickly approached as Lisa opened the door to the room and appeared in front of Han Shor wearing a cotton nightgown. Although the originally innocent and cute Lisa's appearance hadn't changed at all after experiencing the tragic changes in her life and she was still so young and naive, her bright eyes were always tinged with a faint sadness. Her entire demeanor had become a bit pitiful, and she was quite different from her previous unruly and willful self. However, the pitiful Lisa at this moment actually made Han Shor feel more at ease when he looked at her. Han Shor closed the door after walking in and exhaled lightly, pretending to be cold as he said, "The weather outside is really quite cold. Thank you for helping me kill that old dog Calvert." Lisa tugged on Han Shor's sleeve and motioned for Han Shor to follow her into the room as she thanked Han Shor. A stove was burning inside and warmed the room. Lisa added some dry wood to the stove after coming in and then sat down on a soft fur-cushioned chair. "It was your cousin Lawrence's men who killed Calvert. You should be thanking your cousin. I only caused some trouble." Han Shor found a chair and sat down. He casually picked up a cup and poured himself a cup of steaming hot water, drinking it by himself. "If it wasn't for you causing trouble, my cousin's men wouldn't have succeeded so easily." Lisa had indeed changed in some ways compared to before. She mused for a while after saying this and looked a bit timidly at Han Shor, saying, "You spent so much gold to buy me in the slave trading house. According to the rules of slaves, I should belong to you." Startled, Hanshaw immediately said seriously, Lisa, you know that I'm buying you completely for the sake of saving you. I have absolutely no other intentions. Besides, those gold coins weren't that much. We're friends after all, don't misunderstand. Shaking her head sadly, Lisa looked at Hanshaw with a bit of panic, saying, do you dislike me and don't want me anymore? No, we're friends and this is what I should do. You have your freedom and I don't want you to feel guilty because of those 1,000 gold coins. Hanshaw said hastily. Lisa fell silent again after saying this and said to Hanshaw after a while, because of Bob Asher's framing, my family is completely finished and my status as a slave has been set in stone. You bought me in front of so many people in that slave shop. There's no way to change this fact. Then, I can return your freedom and remove your status as a slave. Hanshaw thought for a moment and said to Lisa. Hanshaw heard footsteps coming from outside at this time. Lawrence walked in with a slight smile after a while and asked when he saw Hanshaw and Lisa talking, what are you two talking about? I'm saying that I want to remove Lisa's status as a slave. Hanshaw looked at Lawrence and responded. Give me your crystal card and I'll transfer 1,000 gold coins to you. Consider that you sold Lisa to me through the legal process and leave the rest to me. Lawrence seemed to have thought about this long ago and immediately made a suggestion when he heard Hanshaw mention this matter. No need, Lisa is my friend and I can give her to you now. I can't accept the 1,000 gold coins. To Hanshaw, 1,000 gold coins was nothing at all. In addition, Hanshaw did have thoughts of saving Lisa. Lawrence didn't insist on declining after Hanshaw's words and nodded at Hanshaw with a smile. He said readily, that's fine, I'll take care of Lisa's status for her. However, this is Valen City and Bob Asher's territory. I'll get Lisa back to the Empire in the next 2 days. Bob Asher won't be able to do anything then even if he wants to. As the third prince, Lawrence had a close relationship with the king. It naturally wouldn't be difficult for him to take care of such a small matter. Now that Valen City was in chaos, it was indeed a bit dangerous for Lisa to stay here. It was definitely a good thing to get her away as soon as possible. Lisa, Brian, and I have some things to discuss in private. We'll be leaving first. Lawrence shot Hanshaw a meaningful glance and walked outside. Hanshaw rose and followed. The two arrived next to a fake mountain in the front of the courtyard. Lawrence looked deeply at Hanshaw and asked, Brian, why did you and Madam Emily come to Valen City this time? This matter was related to the secrets of the Dark Mantle and Hanshaw naturally couldn't say much. He shook his head apologetically, I'm sorry, I promised Madam Emily that I wouldn't divulge this matter. Sighing lowly, Lawrence said sincerely, your background is clean. Although you were once a slave, it doesn't matter much. However, Emily is different. Her current status is Old Han's wife. If you walk too closely with her, it will affect your future. I think I understand what you mean, but I know what I'm doing. You don't need to worry about me in this regard. Right, if you've come to Valen City this time to save Lisa and assassinate Clark, then you've finished your business here. Are you leaving soon? Lawrence had good intentions, but Hanshaw and Emily's relationship had already been set. Hanshaw had his own thoughts and plans and naturally wouldn't change anything because of Lawrence's persuasion. Apart from this, I've also promised someone to deal with Bob Asher of Valen City. Perhaps you can help me. Lawrence stared at Hanshaw and suddenly opened his mouth to speak. Haha, you must be joking. You're inviting me to deal with the chief of the Griffin Legion? This is too funny. I know my own weight. I don't think I'll be of any use against someone of old Bob's level. Hanshaw's heart was as clear as snow, but he purposefully played dumb. Lawrence stared hard at Hanshaw and was about to say something when Lucky's low cry suddenly traveled in from the distance. Not good, this place has been exposed. I think we need to leave immediately, Bob Asher's men are already here. Lawrence was startled and his expression fluctuated slightly. He finally said to Hanshaw, Brian, please take Lisa and leave through the back courtyard through the small path. We still need to make some preparations. Things were urgent at this moment and Hanshaw didn't say much. He nodded decisively and abruptly sprang into action, breaking through the door and rushing into Lisa's room like lightning. He didn't wait for Lisa to say anything as he casually grabbed a fur coat from the wall and wrapped it around Lisa. He carried Lisa through the window and rushed towards the small path in the back courtyard. The urgent neighing of horses sounded in the distance and quickly approached. Han Shore knew that the Griffin Legion would have sent quite a few men this time, and he didn't know if Lawrence and the others would be able to escape. Within Valin City, Bob Asher's Griffin Legion could cover the sky with one hand. Even a prince like him would die if he fought them head-on. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.